Let's slip back in time, not just a few centuries, but tens of thousands of years. Night presses down like a cold animal. Your breath feathers in silver puffs as you crouch beside a low hearth stitched from stone's ash and stubborn hope. Wind keeps testing the hide walls, and far out in the dark, a howl threads itself through the snow until it settles behind your ribs. You feel very mortal. In a very big winter, honestly, you probably won't survive this without friends who run faster than you and bite harder than fear. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what your local time is. I love seeing this little campfire circle stretch around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Fire is your center. It spits and rearranges shadows, buys you a small coin of safety in a market where everything costs body heat. The coin's edge is where they stand, yellow eyes, several sets winking in and out as brush nods. Pads whisper over crusted snow. Tails are held level, curious calculating. You keep your spear low. Tonight's tool isn't wood or stone. It's attention. A sturdy fact to keep while your fingers thaw. This is the late Pleistocene, roughly 126,000 to 11,700 years ago, when bands like yours use hearths not just to cook, but as social anchors and predator deterrents. Most big cats and bears dislike sparks. Wolves, though, are accountants of hunger. They tally risk and reward more often than you blink. That's why they pace the bright border like priests, deciding whether a new god deserves devotion. You test the ledger. A rib bone picked but still fragrant skitters from your hand into the dark. A shadow flows forward, snatches retreats. The others hold their ears swiveling like tiny satellite dishes tuned to the channel called "You Might Drop Something." You almost smile. Congratulations, you've invented the world's first loyalty program. 10 bones tossed. The 11th is free. Terms and conditions apply. See cave wall for details. Smoke pleats upward, then flattens under a gust. And that plume does another job. It muddies the cue cards of scent that tell predators where you've been. You smear a fingertip of charcoal under your eyes. A trick a grandmother swears dulls snow glare and confuses jealous spirits that steal warmth through the pupils. Quirky, sure, but it also hides your gaze a little, which matters when yellow eyes are reading it like a menu. Near your knee, a child stirs under a woven hood. You lay a hand there, a promise. The howls taper to hush. One gray bold as frost lies sphinx-like with its chest angled, not at you, but at the blackness beyond. That posture looks like a watch post. Whether the watch is for you or with you, that's the electric question, making your heart beat louder than the wind. Scholars still argue whether this edge of the fire acquaintance is where the Pact begins, or whether bolder wolves started it by shadowing hunts, slipping into the wake of your spears to claim the panicked stragglers. Others point at ancient skulls. Goyet Eliseevici points, you'll name later, and debate early dogs versus wolves with interesting cheekbones. In other words, even the experts huddle around moving shadows and make the best story they can. You shift a log, and sparks zip outward like insects, too ambitious for their own good. A cousin laughs soft and calls you a fire wrangler, which is generous. Fire is a moody pet. You feed it, praise it, and pretend it listens. Meanwhile, the smell of roasted marrow works its chemistry on every stomach within scent range. The wolves watch not the flame, but your hands that turn wild heat into gentle food. If they had clipboards, this is where they take notes. A breeze shifts, and every wolf lifts its head in the same beat. You follow their gaze. Far off, a cat coughs a flat sawtooth sound. Then another answers. Your band stills. The wolves still. Whatever else you are to each other, you're also batteries for one another's alarms. You clap so the sparks fly higher, small theater for big cats. No clapback exists yet, which is lucky. You'd lose that comment thread. A line of trampled snow has become an informal treaty. You don't cross theirs, they don't cross yours. When a rib pops in the heat, you and the bold gray both flinch, then both relax, then ridiculous involuntary. Both glance at the child. This mirror behavior isn't friendship, but it rhymes with it. You slide another scrap outward. The gray comes just close enough that you can see frost pearls on whiskers, the delicate tremor of nose muscles reading your biography. Another fringe tidbit makes the rounds in your head on the worst nights. People tuck orphaned pups into cloaks as living hand warmers, fur water bottles with wagging thermostats. Maybe that started as charity, maybe as engineering. Warmth shared is warmth kept. And once you've shared, warmth sharing watch seems less like madness and more like math. By now, a couple of the yellow eyes have vanished, scouts gone to audit the darkness. The gray remains patient, no panting, no flash of teeth. You angle your body so you're not staring, because staring is rude or dominant, or both, and neither is wise. Instead, you let your voice settle to a thread and sketch tomorrow's reindeer drive where noise and motion count more than heroics. The wolves won't grasp words, but they might learn the music. Overhead, pale curtains of aurora sway like laundry hung by giants. The wind combs the ridgeline with icy teeth. You tuck the child's hood closer, rake the coals into a red river, and accept that you'll sleep in slices, half dozes measured by the sound of pads shifting snow. Yet, there's a new arithmetic glimmering here. You offered light and leftovers. They offered early warnings and a second circle of eyes. On a night like this, that equation feels fair. You lean back, feel the rough stitch of hide under your shoulder blades, and listen as the slow magnet of the fire draws everyone closer. Human wolf, fear, hope, until all those opposites make a kind of truce. If you breathe quietly enough, you can almost hear it, the first draft of a pact, humming between heartbeats and paw beats, as fragile as frost, as stubborn as hunger, and bright as the eyes at the edge of the light. Dawn is a thin blade of pewter on the horizon when you trudge across the wind-hardened snow toward a dark hump that interrupts the white, a mammoth stilled. The air tastes like pennies and pine smoke. Ravens keep score from the ribs of a dead spruce, their voices sounding like someone cracking old leather. The wolves get there before you. Gray commas stitched around the punctuation mark of meat and memory. They don't charge, they don't flee. They wait, measuring your stride, your eyes, your hands that can turn bone into kindness. You slow, let your breath settle so it doesn't look like steam-snorting bravado. The pact you're testing today is simple enough to carve on a thigh bone. You get the first cuts. They get the throwaways if they behave, if you behave. You tilt your head to avoid a direct stare bend and draw a smoky line in the snow with a charred stick from last night's fire, the same amateur calligraphy you used at the hearth. It's not a wall, but it declares a do not cross vibe, which is hilarious because wolves can't read, and also effective because everyone can read tension. A mainstream anchor to pocket. While your fingers itch for work across the late Pleistocene, there are sites littered with mammoth bones bearing careful cut marks, spiral fractures from marrow tapping, and the tidy geometry of deliberate butchery. People like you organize around carcasses as if they're brief towns toolmakers, guards carriers, cooks storytellers. Some winters, whole shelters rise from ribs and jawbones, proof that a single giant can feed you, warm you, and house you, provided you have patience, leverage, and a good sense of humor about living inside your dinner's skeleton. You stage the team, a cousin with a flaker, a friend with a scraper, someone you trust. Watching the ridgeline where cats pretend they invented stealth, the wolves rearrange themselves as if fashioning a hairy parenthesis around your workspace. One steps forward, same posture as last night's bold gray, and tests the snow within the boundary you sketched. You answer with a palm-out gesture, traffic cop energy, even though neither of you possesses a valid license. The wolf freezes, yawns, not boredom, not exactly, more like social punctuation, and sits. That's the opening bell. Ravens drop closer, hopping like tiny editors eager to mark up everyone's process. They've learned that wolves break hides and humans open joints. Either way, scraps appear, and scraps are currency. You feel supervised. You also feel grateful, because corvids and canines have a sixth sense for trouble, and when the avian chorus hushes in unison, you know to glance up. Today, all you get is wind shouldering the grass. You nod, thanks to the birds anyway. Tip your non-existent hat to your unpaid interns. Tools sing, stone kisses, sinew yields, and the world fills with the clean wintergreen smell of opened fat. No gore, just chemistry and quiet choreography. A juvenile wolf can't stand it. He pads 3 bold steps over the line, eyes too bright tail narrating his hopes in paragraph form. You breathe out, pick up a long rib you've already cleaned, and skim it across the ice like a pond stone skipping toward the far weeds. The pup chases, slides over commits, and performs the earliest recorded slapstick routine. Congratulations, you've invented workplace safety by distraction. Also joke 1. While you work, you practice the art that will matter for centuries, reading faces, not as threats, but as subtitles. Ears forward means curiosity. A stiff-legged walk is a prelude to, I'm thinking of taking that. And the slow blink, the one you give your own child at night, melts tension like sun on hoarfrost. You mirror the slow blink. 2 wolves blink back. It's not friendship, but it's grammar. Researchers still argue whether moments like this happen mostly after hunts you orchestrate, or whether you're often opportunistic scavengers of cold-felled giants. Some say you dig pits or drive herds off icy shelves. Others that you follow ravens to winter casualties and throw a pop-up festival. Either way, the choreography of you first, we later gets rehearsed at carcasses, because carcasses are classrooms where patience is graded on a curve, and anyone who rushes fails spectacularly. Quirky camp lore slips in between tasks, and Aunt insists on tossing the spirit portion over her left shoulder before the first share for the cold gods. And for good manners, she whispers, never mind what the wolves think of divine table settings. Someone else smudges a dab of rendered fat on the axe haft, so tools don't get jealous of meat. You grin because last night you daubed charcoal under your eyes, and it made the dark feel less interested in you. Who are you to argue with rituals that steady the hands? You establish a rhythm slice lift, backstep toss. Each throw arcs not into the wolf's tantante, but off to the side, a gentle suggestion. Over there, please, that transforms hunger into order. And the order buys you quiet minutes to work the knuckles and tap the marrow. A cousin hums something that sounds like a lullaby, and either because they like the melody or because the song sounds like confidence, the wolves relax into sphinx poses again, chests angled outward, ears drinking the wind. Without anyone declaring it, you've braided your senses into a single wider awareness. It's like the firelight trick from last night, just colder and with more calories. A practical fact you can feel in your calves: the ground is a freezer you don't pay rent for. Once the best pieces are trimmed, you pack them in compacted snow, stack them in lidded pits, and bank drifts over top. Permafrost is your pantry. Ravens act like auditors checking your seals. You mutter that you'll invoice the wind for storage. The wind, as usual, ghosts you. On the edge of sight, a hyena pace saws the horizon, all shoulders and suspicion. The wolves rise as one, not charging, not bluffing, merely being obvious about owning this punctuation mark of land and luck. You stand too, a mirror in wool and hide. The hyena calculates, decides your pop-up town is more trouble than a nap, and dissolves into scrub. You do not cheer. You breathe. Then, because you are only human, you whisper to the wolves, "Nice." It's ridiculous, but one of them blinks slowly. "Joke too," you say. "We'll put you on payroll after the probation period. Terms and conditions, see cave wall." You pause to flex cold fingers, watch your breath scroll away, and think about how this truce rearranges more than lunch. Kids grow up learning wolf grammar. Wolves grow up predicting human reach. You start favoring individuals who keep a calmer distance. The wolves keep showing up with pups that don't bolt at a laugh. That's how selection sneaks in without a trumpet. Just two species rewarding temperaments that fit the space between teeth and hands. Historians still argue whether those craniums with altered snouts and crowd-pleasing brows are early dogs or just wolves from a friendly neighborhood. They'll keep arguing long after you've finished stacking the last snow lid. You don't need a taxonomy today. You need the silence that means you can turn your back for 30 seconds and not lose a hand. 30 seconds is a kingdom here. By the time the light bruises toward afternoon, your camp radiates competence tidy. Piles bundled sinew rope, a travois frame sketched in willow for hauling the prize home. The wolves lounge like half-paid security detail full enough on thrown bones to be lazy, hungry enough to be nearby. You gather the marrow-broken shafts and place two perfect hollowed tubes a little farther out, a clumsy thank you shaped like a toy. A pup picks one up and trots in tiny circles, delighted at the sound it makes when he drops it. Joke 3 and not bad. You've accidentally invented the squeakless chew. When you finally sling the first haul, the world has settled into a believable harmony. Ravens babysit the airwolves, draft the perimeter. You walk the middle path between fear and pragmatism. The truce at the mammoth doesn't feel like a miracle or a myth. It feels like a rule you can live by, written in eye contact and patience, enforced by the simple physics of a good throw, and reinforced by the way everyone sleeps a little deeper that night, even with the wind practicing its old lonely songs across the white. Back at camp, the world smells like a recipe you never asked to memorize: resin, wet hide thawing fat, and a constant ribbon of smoke that threads through everything: your hair, your cloak, even your stories. You feed the fire a careful diet: dry twigs for flame, damp moss; for smoke, a skinny log for coals that last. The wolves learn your menu faster than some cousins do. They sit at the edge, as if the glow is a lake and they're thinking about waiting. Fire is a celebrity here. Everyone stares, no one touches, and still it insists on a dramatic crackle. If sparks had a press agent, they'd book them on a tour. You raise a branch and fan the small blaze until it leans into its own breath. Smoke pools under the hide roof rolls and slips through the seams like a shy spirit. It stings your eyes. Congratulations, you've invented the earliest smoke detector, also known as blinking a lot. But that sting buys you something: a smudge that hides you in the olfactory gossip that rules the steppe. When you step away from the hearth, you carry a portable fog. To a prowling cat, you now smell less like a potential meal and more like a very small campfire with opinions. Here's your sturdy fact to keep. Next to the coals hearths are not occasional visitors in human camps. They're permanent address markers. Soot-stained ceilings, ash lenses under floors, rings of reddened stone. The late Pleistocene is tattooed with the evidence of people using smoke and embers daily to cook warm preserve and keep night animals honest. Meat smoked above a steady smolder lasts longer. Fish hung in the blue stream of haze travels farther. Hides cured in smoke soften into jackets that don't argue with your shoulders. The wolves don't know anthropology, but they know what lasts and what smells friendly. They choose to nap closer to the side where the smoke drifts. You notice their choreography around firelight, like you noticed their choreography around the mammoth. At first, they lie lengthwise to the glow eyes narrowed, taking the heat on ribs the way you do the first time you discover a sun patch on a winter floor. Then, bolder evenings, a pup creeps to the line of warm sand where sparks die and stretches until one paw crosses into ember territory, then snatches it back with theatrical dignity, as if to say, "I meant to do that." You keep the line clean with your ash rake, the same charred stick you use to draw boundaries on snow. Tools get promoted around here. The smoke does another job you love. It is a rumor silencer. Your camp is a perfume counter, hundreds of small scents broadcasting secrets. Which way you walked, what you carried, who dropped the marrow spoon and pretended they didn't. Smoke blurs those signals, makes you harder to read. You've watched wolves thread new paths when they hit a smoke bank, hesitating like scholars at a contradictory tablet. Historians still argue whether smoke masking like this is something your ancestors did on purpose, fanning green boughs to flood the air before a hunt, or whether it's a lucky byproduct of 1,000 cooking fires that just happened to make you less legible to noses that wanted to know too much. Either way, it turns the night volume down. Quirky camp wisdom sparkles amid the steam. A grandmother pinches wood ash and rubs it into her palms before she handles meat, swearing it keeps the greed off the smell, and bonus, keeps fleas philosophical instead of ambitious. A boy dabs ash stripes across a wolf's shoulders one evening, as if painting lightning, and the animal doesn't mind. Is that science? Is that fashion? The wolves look rakish, and the hyenas keep their distance. You decide not to argue with outcomes. Ash has bite anyway, it is lie's distant cousin, and you've noticed how a paste of ash and water slicks the grease off scrapers. A primitive soap without the drama. You tend the fire into a low, steady temperament. No fireworks, all heart. Embers are your favorite coworkers. Quiet, reliable, and bright enough to make big predators do math. A cave lion will cross wind ice and pride to steal a calf, but it won't casually swagger into a field of orange beads that spit at paws. Bears mutter from the dark like grumpy landlords. Hyenas sentence you to smell court and then decide to file elsewhere. The wolves understand the calculus too. They place themselves like punctuation commas of gray around the ember paragraph, so there's always a set of eyes facing the part of the night you are not. You use smoke like paint. When you tan a hide, you sew a cone rig a small chimney and breathe life into a smolder of punky wood and damp leaves. The hide drinks smoke until it changes color and softness, until the rain beads on it like respect. You whisper thanks to the stub of fungus that holds the ember for an hour, touchwood, a portable star. Joke 1 you call the finished cloak Ode to Campfire number 10, and someone asks if there'll be a number 11. You tell them you're in talks with the designer. The designer is the wind. The wolves' ears do this thing you love. Each tilt is a verb. Tonight, their verbs list, perk, flatten, swivel, rest. When the glow touches their pupils, you can see the tiny mirror of the fire inside each eye like a lantern hung in a deep cave. They're acclimating, rewiring fear into respect. And you're doing it too. The first time a spark snaps, you flinch in sync. The third time, you and the bold gray share the same shrug. That synchronicity feels like grammar again, a shared punctuation mark neither of you knew yesterday. Now the hard part, keeping the boundary gentle. You do not want wolves who dive into the pile of drying kindling. You do not want pups who think roasting scraps will leap into their mouths if they look cute. So you invent a ritual. Before feeding you, drag a ring of spent ash with your rake a pale halo around the hearth and toss every reward just beyond that line. The wolves learn cross the ash no snack. Wait beyond feast by patience. You could write it on the cave wall under payroll after probation, but the audience has already memorized the policy. There's a fringe tale that makes the rounds around embers. The smoke spirits dislike jealousy and will cough on anyone who hogs warmth. So you shuffle a space aside and invite the bravest wolf to lie in the secondary glow while you tell stories. It's not petting, it's proximity with boundaries. Your child copies your posture, then your slow blink. The wolf copies the child's sigh. For a moment, this feels absurdly domestic, fire nap, soft foot pads on dirt floor. And then a gust reminds everyone that the world is still made of teeth and cold. Joke 2, you declare the gust management here to check if you're on schedule. The fire sparks in agreement, full of notes and suggestions. A fact you can taste at the back of your tongue burning. Certain resins, juniper, pine, pitch, sweetens the smoke and drives midges out of the air like you've rung a dinner bell for their enemies. Tonight, you toss in a few sticky knots and watch the insects thin. The wolves sneeze twice and then settle into the new perfume. Someone mutters that pine keeps bad luck allergic to your home. You don't mind adding luck to the list of things smoke manages. It already files so much smell pests, predators, and mood. Historians still argue whether wolves first tolerated fire because they tracked people for leftovers, or because they learned that sleeping near the warm side meant waking without frost on whiskers. The timeline's edges blur like breath in starlight. But in your bones you feel its smoke and scent are the quiet carpenters of trust here. You manipulate the air's alphabet. The wolves read what you're trying to say. You are not food. You are the kitchen. By the time the constellations wheel to their midnight seats, the camp is a planet with a lit core atmosphere included. You bank the coals into a low red smile and let the smoke thin to a sigh. The wolves arrange themselves in that familiar parenthesis, one lying close enough to feel the edge of heat ears assigned in pairs to the four corners of dark. Joke 3, you tell the ravens they're on night shift. They heckle you from a spruce and then tuck beaks under wings like tiny sarcastic guards. You stretch under your cloak and breathe the incense of your own survival. Your skin is a little sticky, your hair is a little smoky, and your chances are a little better. Mutual tolerance isn't a treaty you announce. It's 1,000 small favors traded under the same roof of scent and light. Tonight's smoke blurred you into safety and fire taught restraint. Tomorrow, you'll walk out smelling less like prey and more like the hearth that wants you back. And the wolves with ember light in their eyes will shadow that scent like a promise. Night resets your senses the way cold resets a creek. Every ripple turns glassy, every sound carries. You bank the coals into a long, low smile and slide your cloak higher, ear-tuned to the quiet grammar of the dark. Out past the ash ring, the wolves arrange themselves in punctuation again, commas where the brush opens a firm period on the game trail, a question mark crouched by the drift that hides a hollow log. Their ears do the work of lanterns. Your eyes do the work of string, tying one lantern to the next until a perimeter hums to life. You do not declare a watch, you fall into one. A cousin drifts to the doorway, rubs a thumb along the haft of a spear, then surrenders to a doze you can hear in the soft click of tongue on teeth. Another stretches by the coal's eyelids, heavy but not closed. You take the hour when the fan of wind changes direction and the camp's scent goes wandering. Joke 1 whispered toward the wolf on the trail. Night shift pays extra, benefits after probation. He replies by not replying, which, to be fair, is a very wolf thing to put in writing. The warning system you and they trade isn't words, it's a duet of interruptions. A small snap from the spruce wolf ears tilt. You lift your head. 2 breaths, hold hands, then release. A distant pad thud. Hyena probably triggers a wave wolf. Rises, you sit up, the raven mutters from its sleep knot overhead, and a child sighs but doesn't wake. That last part is the point. You're not building a fortress tonight, you're building sleep. Bravery is a daytime story. Alarms are the bedtime lullaby. A steady daylight fact to tuck into the blankets in many foraging bands studied in recent centuries. Nighttime wakefulness staggers naturally. Someone is almost always up poking embers or mending or thinking. Call it the sentinel effect. It's the sort of pattern that doesn't need a sergeant. It just needs cold children and coyotes to exist. Your little camp proves the rule without knowing there is one. The wolves' contributions are simple and priceless. Their hearing nets higher pitches than yours. Their noses turn air into newsprint. More importantly, they fuss earlier than you do, which gives you time to err on the side of caution without feeling dramatic. When the bold gray lifts his head and growl hums the way a drumhead hums when a step touches the floorboards, you don't panic. You follow the growl like a pointing finger. Often, the answer is nothing. Sometimes the nothing is a cat pretending to be the wind and deciding to keep pretending. You add devices that are mostly manners with string. Before sleeping, you hang 2 bone rings on a line by the main trail. If a body brushes through the rings, kiss and chime a small sound, but in a world tuned to quiet small is plenty. Someone laughs that you've invented wind music. You say the composer is the breeze and the conductor is fear. Joke too soft, so the jokes don't scare the sleep away. Quirky camp lore grows anywhere nerves need fertilizer. One aunt sprinkles a pinch of ash in a circle by the doorway. and tells a story about slippery footprints that confuse spirits and thieves. She learned it from her mother, who might have learned it from a gust of superstition. Another cousin lines a low fence of dry sticks around the food cache, not as a barrier anything with hunger and opinions can step over, but as an audible gossip that tattles when someone tests it. The wolves take a turn inventing technology too. One pup lies with his back against a bark slab, so every vibration translates into a private thunder he can't ignore. That, you admit, is brilliant. Historians still argue whether these night watch braids wolf pricks, human stirs child sleeps are the seeds of a formal partnership or just a long, lucky overlap of habits. Some point at later villages where dogs bark you awake before the goats get dramatic. Others insist that back here it's looser, more like two neighbors leaning on the same fence. You don't have footnotes, only footfalls. But the shape of the arrangement feels like policy we notice. You notice. The night notices that we're difficult to surprise. A mainstream anchor paddles in from tomorrow, long after your bones are part of the soil. People will bury their dead with dogs at their sides, a sign that this alarm sharing grows roots as deep as grief. You can't see that yet, but you're rehearsing for it. You've already learned to hear not just wolf sounds, but wolf silences. When the trail sentinel yawns without sound and sets his chin back on paws, you know the distant hyena veered off. When he stands and does not shake snow from his ruff, you rise without speaking. The difference saves energy, like a good pouch saves sinew. You refine your own sounds to fit the duet. A low click of your tongue means I see that. A barely whistled exhale means hold. A palm raised half-lit by embers means stay out of the ash ring, which, after a couple of weeks, the pups obey like a rule carved on their bones. If a youngster celebrates a close brush with glowing coals by pogoing in a circle, you give him a long look that says, in any language, we're replacing the rug if you burn it, even though there is no rug. Joke 3. Even the ravens twitch like they almost laughed. Your body adapts to the watch the way feet adapt to new paths. Catnaps stack like shingles. You dream in slices. You learn the weight of each night wind by its temperature on your cheek. The wolves adapt too. The bold gray no longer stares at you when you stand. He stares past you. His ears swivel when your cousin coughs, but then swivel back as if to say, not my problem. Your business is inside the ash ring. My business is the big dark. Delegation, which any decent camp learns because the dark is too large to supervise alone. A fringed tidbit flits through the fire's whisper. Someone once fastened dried gourd halves to a tripvine in a deer trail. When it snapped, the gourd mouths clapped together and made a sound like a surprised fish. The wolves were offended. The humans were delighted. The deer were extremely confused. Did it work once? That's enough to keep the idea alive for a few winters. Most technologies were accidents first and arguments later. The night tests you with small exams instead of one big disaster. A civet tries the edge of your cache fence. The bone rings click. 3 wolves rise without comment. You stand and move the ember rake as if it were a lazy torch. The civet insulted by procedure leaves. A fox stares too long at the spot where rendered fat sits cooling. A pup stares back longer, blinking with the patience of someone guarding future soup. A shadow you hoped was nothing proves to be nothing wearing a dramatic cloak. You pass your exams with boring answers, which is the ideal grade. Another fact warm as the cloak across your knees. The more you share these quiet alarms, the less you need to raise your voice. Shouting is for cliffs and panics. Whispering is for plans, and you live on plans. The wolves learn your smallest cues because small cues mean food and calm and not being yelled at for crossing ash. You learn theirs because theirs mean that the big cats you'll never meet since they changed their minds are already somewhere else. Cooperation in the dark is the art of making absence. Scholars still argue whether wolves intend to help you or whether you simply edit your life around what wolves already do. The answer, which would bore a storyteller and delight a sleeping child, is probably both. And also, it doesn't matter tonight. What matters is the way the child sleeps, through your quiet rise, through the bone ring kiss, through the low hum in the wolf's chest. Morning will arrive with fewer crises because the night had more listeners than braggers. Just before dawn, fidgets behind the hills, your last waking moment slants toward gratitude. For the ash ring that taught the pups patience, for the smoke that brushed your scent into a softer shape, for the bone rings that tattle without drama, for the wolf who does not look at you, but with you toward the place where trouble might congeal. You tuck your chin, let the coals breathe on your cheeks, and close your eyes for 5 grateful heartbeats, long enough for the perimeter to keep braiding itself, without you long enough to remember that bravery is fine for songs. But good alarms make the lullabies true. Morning is a soft-lipped animal, nosing the camp awake, pale light licking the ash ring, frost pearls loosening from grass. You're halfway through stretching the night out of your shoulders when a sound like a hiccup tries to be a growl. From the brush, 3 small shadows wobble into punctuation commas, with ears too big for their sentences. Pups. Their legs are question marks. Their tails write entire novels about sausage that hasn't been invented. Behind them, 2 adult wolves hover weight-back ears like antennae aimed at your hands, your eyes, your everything. You keep your shape small. You kneel. One pup sneezes so hard he almost tips over, fierce, terrifying a warrior whose battle is with his own nose. You slide the ember rake aside and drag a low line of ash, the rule they already half know, beyond the halo snack heaven. Inside patience school. The bravest pup pads to the edge and performs a playbow so exaggerated it looks like a prayer to gravity. You bow back a slow head dip. No teeth, no stare, no sudden catalog of your to-do list. Joke 1, you whisper. Welcome to orientation. Benefits after probation. The pup tilts his head, and your heart steps sideways like it's dodging a thrown snowball. Here's a sturdy daylight fact to slide into your pocket. Young canines have a socialization window, weeks when their brains are sponges for what counts as safe and family. Handle them gently then, and they tend to file you under tribe instead of trouble. You don't know the word window, but you know how a pup who shares naps by the hearth grows up less interested in biting the hand that throws bones. You also know play is not frivolous. It is a rehearsal room. Paws learn breaks, jaws learn pressure, and every tumble teaches what to do with legs that aspire to be stilts. The adults test your patience before the pups test your kindness. 1 steps closer, not crossing the ash, just putting weight into her front paws so the ground can carry her opinion to you. These are mine, but your scraps buy time. You nod at that truth. You slice a sliver of simmered meat, toss it not to the pups, but just past the ash to the side where a patient adult can claim it without teaching tiny thieves to storm your pantry. Your throw arcs like a gentle sentence. The wolf reads it and signs her name with a chew. Trust is calligraphy, written in food. Quirky camp habits bloom instantly when small teeth appear. A cousin whittles a stick round and smooth, then dips the ends in charcoal so the pup won't stab his own gums, a baby's teether reinvented for wolves. Another swears by warming scraps in broth before feeding, so their bellies learn our fire. Someone braids a grass loop, a soft collar that's not a trap, just a kiss with boundaries, so you can guide a bold pup out of the drying rack before he learns to love jerky more than life. The ravens, insulted by the cuteness, pretend to ignore everything while memorizing where you keep the good bits. The first lesson is not sit or heel. It's gentle. You offer a knuckle knotted with old work and let a pup mouth it. The moment teeth press too hard, you freeze, not yanking away, which is how you turn a game into a chase, but turning stone boring as a snowdrift. The instant the pressure softens, you praise in the language of breath and a tiny chin scratch. The pup blinks. You can almost feel a wire get soldered in his brain. Soft mouth unlocks magic. Hard mouth pauses the universe. Training is just a set of physics tricks. where cause meets delicious effect. Historians still argue whether people like you actively raided dens for pups to raise, or whether the wolves themselves selected for camp-friendly puppies by hovering at your edges until the bravest or hungriest wandered in and got adopted by Soup. Some point to cut marks in hearth layout that suggest deliberate care. Others sketch a slow drift where scavenging became sleeping. Nearby sleeping, nearby became playing, and playing became whoops. This one knows our songs. You don't fill out a form titled Domestication Strategy. You do, however, invent nap with supervision. There's a pulse beat of science you can feel in your bones, even if you don't name it when a pup meets your gaze and holds it. Without fear, something warm floods both of you. Your breath slows. His tail makes a small metronome. Later, people will call it a hormone loop. Tonight, it's just the way looking softly at a small face turns your skeleton into a hammock. One pup tests the theory by climbing no, by spilling half onto your shin. You become furniture. The adult female huffs, decides you pass whatever audit she's running, and folds into a loaf just outside the ash ring, eyes half lids, ears full volume. A mainstream anchor to tie to the future. Long after this camp is a rumor of soot and good decisions, people will bury their dead with dogs, sometimes even with pups, and sometimes with grave goods bones and beads, as if the animal had a title. Bon Oberkassel. They'll call one of those places, and scholars will mumble about status and grief and the way a friend can have 4 legs. You can't see that far ahead, but you can see how the child across from you is already adding the pups to her story like they've been here forever. You try a simple game that isn't called a game yet. You set a small bundle of grass under a shallow basket and let the pups watch. You tap the basket, lift it, give one pup a moment to nose the bundle out. He does triumphant and trots in circles like he just invented circles. You reset a touch harder. The adult watches too, head-tipped amused, or maybe re-evaluating your magic tricks. Joke 2, you announce Enrichment Activity Module 1, and your cousin snorts into his hands because he has seen you lose to a knot before. Not everything is a postcard. Fleas arrive like uninvited cousins. You rub ash into the fur at the pup's scruff's fingers. Gentle nails, a little scratchy, and the tiny acrobats vacate the premises with loud opinions. A grandmother murmurs a fringed tidbit. Smear a thumb of pine pitch on a pup's collar knot, so Forest luck sticks and ticks don't. The pitch makes everything smell like a clean lightning strike. The ticks mind very much. You add the trick to your ledger of small mercies. Rules matter. Nobody eats inside the ash ring, wolves or kids or you. Pups who pivot toward the fire line find a palm in their path and a slow blink that says restart. When they put paws where patience lives, the sky rains scraps. You attach a little sound to the moment. Food flies a whistle through your teeth, just a syllable of air. Soon, the sound itself makes tales do grammar. That whistle will do good work later when your hands are full and your mouth is your only free tool. For now, it's a lullaby that smells like soup. Historians still argue whether floppy ears and friendlier faces arrive because you picked them on purpose, favoring pups who looked like kindness, or because the long, slow drift toward camp life changed bodies as a side effect. Later thinkers will call it the domestication syndrome and write poems about neural crest cells. You call it the one with the softer eyes, and you notice not for the first time that softness wins more dinners than bravado. By afternoon, the camp has learned a new choreography. Children carry sticks without waving them near noses. Adults feed adults first pups, second and themselves whenever there's a lull, because nothing breeds begging faster than making eye contact while chewing. The bold gray from last night pretends he's not watching the antics. He is absolutely watching the antics. When a pup trips over his own paws and does a full somersault, the gray performs a sigh that says, "We were never that ridiculous," which is the universal lie of elders everywhere. Joke 3, you bow formally to the elder and ask if he'd like to co-author a pamphlet titled Dignity for Beginners. You end the day as you began it, by the hearth smoke threading the air into a softer shape. One pup has discovered the bliss of sleeping with his nose pressed to the ash ring, stealing warmth without argument. Another wriggles so close to your knee, you can feel the small machine of his breathing, notched down from hum to purr. The adult female lifts her head once roll call, then lets it sink again. You're no one's owner. You are a neighbor the night can live with. And if tomorrow's wind sharpens, or tomorrow's hunt stretches into a lesson, you'll have more listeners, more learners, more small bodies practicing the art of staying. You pull the coals into their long smile. The pups sigh like closing books. Somewhere outside camp, a cat decides to try elsewhere. The ash ring glows with its quiet rules. The bone rings rest ready to gossip if needed. You lean back, feel your spine turn into a gentle question mark, and let a small, ridiculous hope stand guard with the wolves that these tiny commas will one day be the pause between danger and sleep. Snow hisses under your boots as you move into the broad, pale amphitheater where the herd will pass reindeer heads low against the wind, all knees and patience. The wolves ghost along the flanks, not inside your line, but just beyond it, like understudies waiting for their cue. You spread your people where the ground narrows toward a shallow ravine, the place where land itself lends you hands, and you trade glances the way you traded scraps calmly, as if calm were a tool. Your breath fogs. A raven spirals once like a signature at the bottom of a contract you can't read, but agree to anyway. You've learned this dance from 100 small experiments. No shouting? Not at first. You let the wind carry the news that something is there, brush of scent, glimpse of movement, and the herd obligingly slides away from the something toward the nothing you've left open. The nothing is your funnel, your invisible fence of intention that narrows and narrows until hooves choose the path you've already chosen. Your cousins beat time with quiet clicks and the lift of palm. Your wolves mirror the curve, turning open space into a gentle question whose answer is down the ravine, please, thank you. A sturdy fact to pocket under your belt of sinew. Late Ice Age hunters across the north built whole landscapes into tools, low guiding walls of stones, brush lines, snow berms, even pit traps to steer herds toward kill zones where a handful of missiles mattered more than bravado. Archaeologists will one day walk those lines like reading a score, finding massed reindeer bones and tidy cut marks that sing of cooperation more than chaos. You don't know the word infrastructure, but your feet do. The wolves slot themselves where your coverage phrase. Two take the left flank and do a thing that looks like magic, but is only math. They angle their bodies so the lead reindeer sees both and chooses the middle, which is narrower than it looked a heartbeat ago. The bold gray holds the rear, not chasing herding. You feel the hair along your forearms lift. It's the same electricity as last night when the ash ring taught patience. Only now the lesson is velocity with rules. Historians still argue whether wolves in this era truly respond to your signals or simply capitalize on the same herd tendencies you exploit. Some say your hand flicks and tongue clicks become cues. Others insist the canines are independent opportunists whose arcs just happen to rhyme with yours. Either way, the rhyme is working. When you whistle once the soft syllable you paired with food, the gray glances, then drifts wider, and the rear guard of the herd abandons the idea of escape by river ice. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's the first chord of a future language. Your tools come forward like old friends. A spear with a fire-hardened tip for short work, a carved lever, a spear thrower that turns your arm into a longer arm, and your dart into a flying argument the herd can't outmaneuver. The first time you used it, you hit a tree and declared the tree conquered. Today, the dart kisses air and lands where legs meet luck. Two animals stumble, not in pain that rattles the heart, but in the honorable physics of a clean strike. You close quickly. Others do too. The wolves hold their places. Nobody breaks rank. The ravens, to their credit, pretend they trained you all. Quirky camp lore slips into the wind like a grin. Before a hunt's one ant rubs the soles of her shoes with a pinch of dried wolf scat to borrow their boldness, and confused noses. It is both disgusting and embarrassingly clever. Predators and prey both read the ground with their faces, and your feet are writing a stranger's name today. A cousin chews a shred of birch pitch to soften it for hafting, then sticks the warmed gum on a loose point adhesive and nervous calm in one. You crack that you're opening a boutique for eau de mammoth and wolf, and someone mutters they preferred your earlier fragrance smoke number 10. Joke 1, carried off by the gust. The drive tightens. You do not run the reindeer to collapse. You bend their path until the land takes over. A few peel off. Let them seize your pulse, because patience wields a longer knife than panic. Your wolves echo that patience, never lunging, never crossing your line, letting their silhouettes be enough. When the first animal tumbles in the shallow ravine, your spear is already up. The finish is swift, grateful clean. You whisper the thanks your grandmother taught the same one who paints ash circles and scolds fleas. And the wolves wrapped absorb the ceremony without complaint. A mainstream anchor to set in the snow people and canids hunting together will echo across millennia, from reindeer on wind plains to boar in oak woods to stag in calm valleys. Later, dogs will specialize, some for speed, some for nose, some for the steady courage of facing antlers. Here, specialization is still a rumor, but the seeds are visible in the way the gray chooses distance over teeth, the way a younger wolf shadows your best thrower as if apprenticing in geometry. The messy middle of cooperation arrives right on schedule. A yearling bolts along the left wall of your funnel and finds a gap you meant to block with a brush pile that blew flat. Two wolves pour into the space, but there, a hair too early a pounce would splinter your order. You whistle the soft syllable, not loud, not pleading, just the same note you used beside the hearth. One wolf hesitates, eye flicking to you, and in that hesitation, the herd's edge turns away from the gap all on its own. Was it the whistle, the angle, the breath of luck? You'll tell the story as if you planned it, because good stories train future days. Historians still argue whether these moments qualify as training or are simply happy overlaps of instinct. They also argue about timing. Did this level of coordination flower before the first truly doggish skulls, or only after? The dates will keep waltzing as new bones speak. You meanwhile stash another clean throw in your memory and a silent thank you in your pocket for the gray, who listened when listening mattered. Joke 2 arrives with your favorite kind of triumph boring. After the flurry, the herd flows on lighter by two bodies and the wolves sit. They sit like employees waiting for a meeting that could have been a gesture. You nod at them, solemn as a chief of snacks, and toss the agreed-upon share, not where they stand, but where the ash ring would be if the world had a hearth. The rule travels. Pups still at camp will one day inherit it. Patience earns distance. Distance earns dinner. You build a quick drag from willow and rawhide travel bones that will sing wolf in a later season and begin the haul. The wolves fan outward again, owning silence the way a good fence owns space. A hyena considers becoming a subplot, then decides your company lacks humor. The ravens descend like punctuation, and you wave them to the leftovers with a flourish that makes your child laugh from the ridge where she watched with a serious face. Joke 3, you bow to the birds and say, as negotiated, your editorial cut. A fringe tidbit to tuck beside your flaker. Someone taught you to whistle a reindeer calf, bleat through a hollow bird bone, the sort of trick that makes the curious step where you need them to step. You used it once, it worked once, and that is enough to keep the bone in your pouch and the story in circulation. The wolves hate the sound which delights your cousins and makes the ravens pretend they're above such theater. Tools you're discovering are as much about timing as they are about stone. By the time camp smoke noses the sky at the horizon, the choreography has settled into a tired grace. You will butcher with the same soft rules as yesterday ash lines, patient throws, because reliability is the miracle no one writes poems about. The wolves will take their honest pay, and you will keep your fingers, and in the quiet that follows, a small understanding will click. Shadowing has become sharing. The night that gave you bone rings and ash halos has handed you a daylight companion who runs the wind like a rumor and the herd like a paragraph. You crest the last rise and see the ember smile you left banked ready to warm a story. When you tell this one, you'll edit fear into craft and luck into policy, because that's how you build tomorrow out of today without scaring the children. The gray drops to a sphinx just beyond the place where the ash ring will glow eyes angled outward. You scrape coals together, and the scent of soup-to-be floats into the air. In the distance, the herd has already forgotten you. That, your grandmother would say, is excellent work. You start your morning lesson with the thing every tribe understands: hands. You lift a palm flat and steady and feel the camp pause as if the gesture has weight. It does. The bold gray edges from maybe to waiting shoulders, loose ears forward a little comma of calm at the sentence's end. You angle 2 fingers left, not a stab more, a breeze, and he drifts in that direction as if the air pushed him. That's the trick. Make your body the weather. The pups watch like students, pretending they're too cool for school, and then copying the notes twice as fast. Clicks come next. Your tongue makes 3 small stones in your mouth. Tick, tick, tick. The first means, I see you. Keep doing that. The second, paired with a tiny chin point, means wider. The third is a brake light. You didn't invent language this morning, but it feels like you're whittling it. Sound is a leash you can coil and release without ever touching fur. Joke 1, you tell your cousin you're launching a seminar on nonverbal project management for people who don't want to be bitten. He says he'll attend if there are snacks. You assure him there are always snacks. A solid daylight fact to keep near your ribs: people have used whistles and silent signs in coordinated hunts for a long time, if not as far back as your exact dawn, then close. Later, in other forests and plains, hunters will pass messages with hand signs: stop, spread close, so no stag hears a careless word. And long before any of those manuals, there were Upper Paleolithic bone flutes in a far future of your past carved bird bones that sing on breath. And if we can make music, we can certainly shape a hiss and a click into instructions. Your little camp doesn't call it protocol. You call it getting lunch without yelling. You carve. A hollow bird bone gets a nicked notch and a plugged end with soft pitch. You test the breath. Find a thin, bright note that doesn't travel like a scream, but carries like a thread. 2 notes mean fan left. 1 low sigh means hold. You do not blast it. You taste it, the way you tasted soup to know when it was a story. The wolves twitch, then look at you, not alarmed, just attentive. The ravens pretend they invented the device and request performance credits. Quirky camp hack. You paint your knuckles with thin lines of red ochre wrist to fingertip, because in dawn fog it helps your people see which finger moved, and also because you like the way the stripes make your hands feel like tools. You meant to build. A grandmother approves, then dots the tips of your nails with soot, so the spirits know which way the story points. It's half fashion, half function, entirely tolerated by the wolves, who are somehow more scandalized by a hat than by stripes. Go figure. You train the pups where the ash ring says not inside. You stand at the line palm down, and when a pup tries to step over you, don't shove. You lower your palm a finger's width, as if pressing invisible air. The pup hesitates. You blink slow. He steps back 1 paw to the hardest arithmetic of his day. The instant he sits, you give the soft whistle and toss a scrap beyond the line behavior written into dinner. With adults, you go smaller, a shoulder angle. Hip turned, a breath that means stay. It's astonishing how much you can say with bones and air. Historians still argue whether wolves of your era truly pick up human pointing and gaze the way later dogs do. Studies in the far future will show domestic dogs excel at following a finger to a thing, while wolves, well raised, right? Some do, some don't, and everyone writes long paragraphs about it. The argument is entertaining, but your experience is boring. Which is good when you point at an opening and step into it. Like a suggestion with knees, the gray reads your whole body, not just the finger, and makes a choice that happens to agree with your plan. Cooperation could be science. It's also vibes. You add a hand sign that saves ankles. Fist closed held near hip stop. Open palm, low slow. Open palm higher, stay where you are but engage your eyes. When a hyena ghosts the edge of the brush that afternoon, you only have to show the palm high and see 3 wolves freeze into statues with very loud ears. The hyena loses interest in statues. You raise your fist and the statues turn back into wolves without stepping. That felt like magic. It was practice wearing a cape. Then come the misfires because every good system trips on its own laces. You lift 2 fingers meaning left fan, but your cousin reads 2 snacks please, which would be funnier if a pup didn't also surge toward you convinced dinner just happened. You freeze the universal pause button. The pup blinks, recalibrates, and sits on his own tail as if he planned it. Your cousin turns his request into a cough and then takes a long interest in the horizon. Joke 2, you announce a new policy. No gestures before coffee and nobody knows what coffee is, but everyone agrees anyway. Later, you whistle the low-hole tone and forget that wind flattens notes. What reaches the gray is a sharp version that sounds like shift right. He does cleanly startling a reindeer you were trying not to spook. No harm, but your ribs do a tap dance. You file the lesson under acoustics air edits. From then on, you pair every whistle with a small matching gesture sound plus sight, so weather has to work twice to ruin your plan. The wolves don't mind redundancy. Redundancy tastes like consistency, and consistency tastes like soup. A sturdy anchor for your pocket in caverns, dotted with hand stencils and black silhouettes. People leave palms as signatures, but some of the hands speak too. A few show splayed fingers in sequences that might be numbers or seasons, or just the human love of pattern. Scholars will argue whether those were hunt tallies, ritual counts, or the prehistoric version of I was here. Whatever the answer, hands are old storytellers. Today, your hands tell a wolf to hold, and he holds the sentence until you period it with a blink. Fringe tidbit from a neighbor camp you once visited, their leader hung a small string of shell beads from his wrist, so that a certain shake made a soft rattle that meant circle wider. The wolves learned the rattle faster than the people. You tried it, discovered your ravens, thought it meant free buffet, and retired the jewelry with dignity. Not every hack travels well. Like jokes, some live and die within a single fire circle. Speaking of jokes, the ravens call you Rattle Chef for 3 days. You pretend to be offended. You're not. You host a little workshop at dusk, ridiculous to call it that, but that's the vibe. Everyone who throws throws. Everyone who signals signals. You stand a cousin at the ravine mouth and pass hand phrases down the line wordless to see if the message arrives intact. Halfway, a child invents a flourish because flourishes feel good, and the signal becomes please dance while moving left, which is not unhelpful but is not the point. You corral the flourish into a joking dance break, then demonstrate the bare bones again. Joke 3, you bow, declare yourself chief of minimalism, and the wind, a notorious critic, applauds by kicking ash in your hair. Scholars still argue whether early whistles were first for music for ritual or for practical direction. Some point to carved flutes and say song came first. Others insist signal hisses and birdbone calls were work tools before they ever became lullabies. A whole separate debate flaps around a famous gnawed bone flute or hyena chew toy, and each team has a favorite eyebrow to raise. You shrug and make a note to use whatever works without getting bitten. That's a religion too, in a way. By moonrise, your body speaks more than your mouth, and the wolves are fluent in your mood, if not your grammar. You catch the gray's eye tip your chin toward the left trail, and he makes the click with his paws that your tongue would have made with your teeth. The pups copy badly, which is gorgeous to watch. The ash ring glows. The bone rings hang ready to gossip. You test the soft whistle once, then pocket it like a secret you'll need later. After the last ember sighs lower, you lie back and let your hands find your own ribs, feeling the quiet hammer there. Hands were tools long before they were sentences. But tonight, they did both held, pointed, promised, apologized when the wind edited the message. Your signs are not sorcery. They're just respectful. They let you speak without waking the night. And across the ash ring, a wolf shifts size and sets his chin on his paws, a period that means we understood enough to rest. The carcasses become calendars, and dinner becomes law. You drag the first sled into camp, and before anyone lifts a blade, you trace the ash ring with your rake a quiet bell that says, "Rules clock in now." The wolves settle just beyond the gray halo heads, forward ears writing their patient signatures in the air. Kids cluster with the wide-eyed politeness of people who know snacks are a moral exam. You breathe, taste cold iron, and smoke and turn meat into a meeting. Your grandmother chairs the board with a ladle. She taps a rib, once order of distribution. Hunters who made the strike don't carve first. Carvers carve. That's the old logic. The skilled cutter protects the yield. The hunter gets honor and everyone eats because knives answer to craft, not ego. A mainstream anchor to keep under your belt across forager worlds, shares follow patterns tighter than bootlaces. Prime cuts for elders and children, marrow for stamina. Offal turned to soup and choice bits apportioned with names like owner by arrow or owner by first spear. You don't have the names, but you have the rhythm. You announce the rhythm with your hands. Marrow is the bank. You split long bones with a clean percussion spiral fractures, singing that you brought skill, not chaos. Fat hazes the air. The wolves exhale like small forges. You scoop the first gleam into a bark cup for the eldest, a woman whose tendons still tie the camp together on days your patience frays. The second scoop goes to children, the third to the injured, and only then the fourth to the hands that threw. You ladle a fifth into a shallow dish you set beyond the ash line. The bold gray glances at you, then at the dish, then at the line and chooses patience. That's a sentence you read with your shoulders. Joke 1, you clear your throat, and in your most serious voice declare, "Welcome to payroll. Benefits after probation remain unchanged." Your cousin groans. The ravens approve this recurring gag with editorial cause. The gray blinks slow, which you decide means he's seen the employee handbook. You keep a ledger, but it isn't on bark. It's in hands glances, and on some winter nights, a notched stick. Quirky tidbit a traveler from a river camp taught you to nick a skinny bone for each basket hauled, or each sinew braided, then tie that tally to a food bundle so the math arrives with the meat. It feels like sorcery the first time, like common sense the second. Later, someone somewhere will leave notched bones in the dirt, and scholars will puzzle over tallies or moons or both. Tonight, your notches just say, "Rana cut," "Joe carried." They watched the kids. The wolves kept the hyena honest. Historians still argue whether these early tallies and rules spring up to ration scarcity or to display fairness. Are you managing calories or curating reputation? They also argue whether the first property you defend is meat tools or stories. From your seat on the snow, reputation has more calories than any rib the camp remembers who shared, who cut clean, and who tried to pocket a sliver with oops in their eyes. The camp also remembers who tossed scraps on time to the ashline dish and who teased the wolves into impatience. Memory is the only prison you need and the only pension that pays. Bone grease is winter's butter. You smash spongy joints inside a hide-lined pit seed. It with hot stones fished from the fire with green forks, and watch the broth turn satin. Stones pop like shy applause. You skim the sheen into gourds, smear a glisten on a cracking lip daub, a shine across a child's cheek like war paint against frost. The wolves' noses hum. You place a small bowl beyond the boundary. Wait for sit and stillness, then nod the release. If a pup bounces you, pause stone still. The bowl becomes a statue until patience returns. It always does. Nothing trains faster than hunger, paired with a rule you can predict. A practical fact you can taste, awful matters. Hearts roast fast at the edge of the coals. Kidneys hide their strength under a smoky sear. Livers demand respect and sometimes taboos. One ant forbids liver to the pregnant, swearing it tangles dreams and steals iron from the moon. Is that medicine or poetry? You don't test it. You thread intestines onto a peeled willow, rinse them in snow, and stuff them with chopped fat and herbs. Winter's ash-roasted sausage casing, hissing morale rising. The first piece goes to the hunter's hands, the second to the one who fletched his dart, the third to the watcher who sang low when cats prowled. The wolves get the fourth, placed with ceremony just beyond the pale. Ceremony is how you teach a wild night what tomorrow means. Freeloaders, human or wolf, meet the mild iron of norms. When a cousin tries to sneak a nibble before the share song ends, a chorus of pointed silence follows him around like geese for a full day. That's enough. When a juvenile wolf leans past the ash line with teeth, you and the bold gray both stiffen. Same moment, same message, and the youngster slinks sideways until his posture spells apology. Social correction is just gravity with eyebrows. You reinforce the contract with signals you invented last section, and one new punctuation mark. 2 soft toe taps near the ash halo mean ready to feed your side. You tap, toss, breathe. The gray waits for the second tap before he moves. Maybe he learned that in 10 minutes. Maybe it took all winter. Maybe you are flattering your teaching. Either way, the camp reads the taps too, and your distribution stops looking like improvisation and starts tasting like trust. A mainstream anchor to set near the coal's hot stone, boiling in skin bags, bark troughs, and stomach pots, is normal technology in your world. It extracts grease from bones and turns tough meat tender without iron. Archaeologists in far-off tomorrows will find cracked stones by ancient hearths and call them boiling stones, and your grandmother will say, "Of course, with grease and smoke, food goes farther. With rules, peace goes farther." And with both, the wolves learn that waiting isn't loss, it's layout. Quirky superstition keeps camp from getting too smug. Someone insists the first marrow spoon must circle the fire clockwise, or the stew becomes jealous. Someone else smears a thumbprint of grease on the doorpost, so hunger leaves by the same path it arrived. You smile and do both, partly because it costs nothing, partly because rituals are the packaging that keeps agreements fresh. The wolves don't care about clockwise, but they care when your voice is steady. Steady voice means no one will lunge, no one will shout, and bones will keep skipping to their dish like well-thrown stones. Historians still argue whether the wolves' tolerance around food in camps like yours is the cause or consequence of partnership. Did you favor the pups who didn't guard bowls breeding calm into doggish faces? Or did wolves, scouted by their own politics, value the humans whose rules made meals predictable? The debate curls like steam over soup. You stir and teach anyway. Either way, predictability is delicious. Enforcement has cousins besides silence. You invent a playful tax. Anyone who eats inside the ash line owes an extra basket of firewood. No complaints. You apply it twice, once to a distracted teen, once to yourself, when you absent-mindedly bite the corner of a strip while telling a story. Paid in wood, forgiven in laughter, banked in memory. Wolves get their version. A young thief gets a 5-breath timeout. No eye contact, no tosses, no words while the rest are served. The social chill blows through fur like a lesson that grew legs. Joke 2, you stage whisper. CHR has procedures. You keep gossip on a short leash. Useful gossip, who hauled, who mended, earns nods. Mean gossip goes brittle in your mouth. You set it down. The ravens who invented both heckle from the spruce and then accept their offal with exaggerated dignity. You bow and announce, as negotiated, the editorial cut, and the birds pretend they aren't delighted. Joke 3 lands with a wing flutter. The bold gray does a thing that makes everyone pretend not to be moved. When a pup nuzzles the dish before the signal, the gray blocks with his chest. Not teeth, not growl, just mass, then turns his head away and waits. That's a sermon. You answer by laying your palm to the dirt and breathing out slow, the way you taught him that now can be a soft word. Across species, the rule is the same: make patience. The path to sweetness, and the path will get crowded. By the time fat has cooled to wax, and ribs hang like parentheses over the smoke, the contract feels older than winter. You've paid the wolves in distance, respect, and honest scraps. They've paid you in early warnings and disciplined bodies. You've paid each other in the coin of everyone sleeping deeper. The ash ring holds its quiet power. The bone rings dream of tattling only if they must. You tuck a gourd of grease where the ground keeps secrets, bank the coals into a long red smile, and let your spine become a satisfied question mark. Tomorrow will bring new arithmetic sleds maybe, and the fantasy of dragging more than backs can bear. But tonight, the social math balances. No one went hungry who shouldn't. No one grabbed. No one burned their nose on the rule. And when the bold gray lies down angled outward, as always, the line of his back looks like a boundary and a promise in the same shape. You pull the cloak up, listen for the bone ring's tiny kiss in case the dark invents trouble, and fall asleep inside a treaty so ordinary it feels like breathing. The world firms up under your boots until it stops being ground and starts being a plan. Ice sheathes the river in a wide blue grin, and the wind combs it smooth, so your reflection looks like a ghost with errands. You feel the camp's weight at your back meat tools, a child's winter, a grandmother's stories, and you realize walking isn't enough anymore. You need to move seasons worth of luck, while the land is briefly a hard road. You need a thing that slides. You begin with a drag 2 long poles kissing at the front, splaying at the rear, lashed to a crossbar of green willow. A travois by any future name, but right now it's just an A-frame that turns your shoulders into leverage. Rawhide thongs sing as you tighten them. When they dry, they'll shrink and make the joinery behave. You test the pull. It bumps, snags, argues. The wolves watch you invent the obvious and decide not to laugh. Joke 1, you bow at them anyway and say, "Welcome to R&D. Benefits after probation." A practical fact you can feel in your hands: the cold is your coworker. Wet rawhide freezes into iron. Snow packed under the runners will glaze if you treat it right. You smear a little grease along the drag's skids, dust it with clean snow, then drag it a short distance to polish the bottom. It starts to hiss instead of growl. Someone claps softly. The ravens pretend they taught you that. You eye the river. The ice hums a note too low to be entirely comforting. You're not foolish about water you can stand on. You test with a spear butt near the shore, listening for the sound that means trust and not story to avoid. The bold gray pads ahead, sets his weight in a small deliberate way, and looks back the way he does at the ash ring before you toss the dish. You follow the look, the test, the math. When the note of the ice slides into a steady tone, you take a breath the size of a new tool and step out. Dogs, that word isn't quite born yet, but its outline is learned to lean into a strap. You braid a broad belly of sinew and softened bark, wide enough not to bite a chest loop, it low, and let the bold gray feel the pull. You don't hitch him to wait first, you hitch him to practice. A child walks backward with a bundle of sticks as pretend cargo, while you match pace on the gray's shoulder so the world doesn't surprise him. The first time the drag jerks, he lifts a paw in offense. The second time, he lowers his head like a yes. You exhale like someone who just negotiated with winter and got terms. A mainstream anchor to pocket next to your flaker, far to the northeast, and far in your future at a place an ice map will call Zhukov Island. People will leave traces. Sled bits butchered dogs, dog's bones bred for 2 jobs, hauling and hunting, that shout across 9.5 millennia traction work right here. The idea you're testing has legs literally. Whether it was born here, there, or in 10 quiet winter camps at once, the cold made good listeners of canines and good engineers of hungry people. You add bodies slowly. A second wolflighter slots alongside the gray. You keep them just far enough apart that shoulders don't bump and tempers don't tangle. Your hand signs from last week do good work flat palm to slow two fingers to widen little circle to turn. The whistle stays in your teeth like a secret you'll only spend when wind steals your hands. You learn the pace that keeps tails neutral and tongues inside mouths pulling is work not a chase. The pups bounce alongside drunk on the idea that work can be a game with snow. Quirky camp medicine arrives in a bark bowl. A grandmother stirs melted fat with a pinch of charcoal and a whisper of chewed spruce needles until it looks like night turned to ointment. You smear a little on each pulling chest where straps might rub and on paw pads where ice makes knives. The wolves lick once, make an offended face, then accept the ritual because the sting that might have been never arrives. You rub a little on your own cracked knuckles and pretend not to be grateful. The ravens request a portion for their delicate feet. You deny the request and they file a complaint. Historians still argue whether traction came before packing. Did dogs pull before they carried side loads on their backs? And whether winter wagons of bone and wood glided first in the Eurasian North or the American North. They also debate the moment when wolf who tolerates camp became dog who looks over a shoulder for permission. The dates skate around like you on black ice. What doesn't slide is the feeling in your ribs when the drag moves and the load glides and the gray glances awaiting the soft whistle he's decided is a period. You refine the machine. Runners get a bone shoe, a long split rib lashed along the wear path to keep the wood from chewing itself into splinters. Someone suggests lacing a rawhide web between the poles to cradle bundles. You do, and the drag stops losing pots to jealous bumps. You thread a safety line through the load that ties to your belt. If a strap fails on a slope, the cargo argues with your hips before it argues with a ravine. You also solve a problem you didn't know you had, the laughter problem. When the gray tries to trot and the drag clumsily kisses his heels, he makes a face so offended the entire camp becomes a wind chime. Joke 2. You apologize publicly to his dignity and adjust the traces longer. You practice the science of straight. Down on the river glare, the drag wants to spin. You plant a light steering stick, a tail like a fishbone, so a nudge here or there keeps it honest. You learn to lean a little, and the wolves learn to accept the lean as part of the song. When a crosswind attempts poetry, you lower your weight into the harness too. Hips remembering that pulling is a chorus line, not a solo. You keep distances, keep calm, and keep the rhythm you invented back at the ash ring. Patience earns distance. Distance earns dinner. A fringe tidbit wheels in from a neighbor band. They thread hollow bird bones onto the trace near the hitch. In deep cold, those tubes sing a faint breathy tone that lets the leader hear if a dog drops out of step behind him. Is that music or maintenance? Both, which is your favorite category. You try it and discover the sound pleases you like a tiny secret flute. The ravens approve of the composition and insist on being credited again. You credit the wind. The cold roads change your map. What was too far in mud and summer is doable in glare and grit. You risk longer hunts because you can bring back more than you can carry. You risk new campsites because the river is a highway with its own rules, and you make friends with those rules. Never trust a covered bend. Never cross where water grumbles loud. Always watch the wolves' ears. Their audit catches cracks. Your spear butt misses. You start caching grease and bones farther from home, safe in snow vaults. No bear bothers when your perimeter has 4 legs and an attitude. A sturdy fact that tastes like hope some dogs in far, far futures grow into shapes designed by this work deep. Chests, thick coats, feet like furry snowshoes, minds that like a task more than a nap. You can't see those faces yet, but you can see the outline in the gray's concentration when the trace goes taut and the world moves because he asked it to. Misfires do their teaching. A young wolf surges at a fox crossing and forgets he's tied to winter. The drag jerks, a pot rolls, you freeze. The gray braces like a grown-up. The youngster stares at the horizon as if horizons are suddenly very interesting. You wait 5 breaths camp HR policy and then restart slower. You adjust the hitch point, lower so surges tug bellies, not throats, and you praise the first 10 steps that are boring. Boring is undefeated. Joke 3 you declare. We reward boring, and the child riding the load announces she has never felt so honored to be cargo. Scholars still argue whether a moment like this, 2 canines leaning into a human idea, should be called the birth of transport, or merely a clever winter hack. They argue whether sled is the right word when runners are ribs, and the steering stick is a polite suggestion. You let them argue across centuries. Your job is to get the soup home. The whistle, soft as a promise, guides the last curve. The gray chest low tail, a neutral banner, pulls the day a little closer to the hearth. By dusk, the drag noses into camp, and the ash ring glows like approval. You unbuckle with fingers that smell like spruce and tallow. You rub the chest salve into work-warmed fur. You put your forehead to the graze, not for long, just long enough to trade breath like a receipt. The wolves angle outward, as always owning the perimeter while you own the fire. Behind you on the hard road that wasn't a road a week ago, your tracks braid with paw prints into a signature the winter can read. We built a way. We didn't carry it alone. The day folds into blue dusk, and you make a different kind of fire, one for stories that steer hands. You nudge the coals into a slow heart and set a pot of pine needles to sigh. Smoke lifts like a curtain, and behind it, the camp becomes a backstage where costumes are just tools, pretending to be poetry. A pelt trimmed and stitched with a ring of small holes lies across your knees. Ears you shaped from bark stand at a jaunty angle. Birch bast is the lining. The tie is softened rawhide that remembers being river. You don't call it a mask because that sounds like lying. You call it listening with your face. You're not alone in the making. A grandmother checks the stitches with thumbs that have taught more than your tongue ever will. A child crushes red ochre, mixes it with grease, and smears a thin line down your nose. Same ochre you once used to paint hunt signs on knuckles. The line says softly, walk like a sentence with fewer commas. A cousin strings 3 pierced wolf teeth on a thong for your wrist, so every small shake makes a small truth. Mainstream anchor people long before and long after you thread animal teeth into necklaces and cloaks. Sungheer's graves will glitter with thousands of beads and pendants. Canid teeth show up often drilled and worn, proof that status and story traveled on skin as much as on tongues. You don't know the site names, but you know the weight, a little pull at the wrist that makes your hand remember courage. The wolves lie in their usual punctuation, angled outward, but they watch the theater with one ear each. You set the pelt hood over your head, and in the shallow shadow, your breath changes. You breathe wider, slower, as if lungs have learned to read tracks. You step around the ash ring, pausing where the patience lives, and the bold gray glances, once then, returns his eyes to the dark. He's seen this rehearsal before. Joke 1, you mutter. Don't worry, I'm not stealing your job. I'm interning, and the ravens cough laugh like critics who can't help themselves. Names become the quiet script. You do not say wolf at night. That's a camp rule you pretend is superstition, but follow like law. You say the neighbor in gray old stone sleeper and drift yellow eyes at the brush. Quirky tidbit 1 ant insists that if you utter the true name after dusk, the called one will arrive wet, which is both ominous and extremely specific. To be safe, you give nicknames the way you give scraps carefully at distance. You also give honor titles to the living allies. The bold gray is, look through the calm female is hearth edge. When a pup sits perfectly outside the ash ring, you dub him waiter, and you promise yourself you won't laugh every time you use it. Historians still argue whether avoidance names like these leave any trace we can read. In the deep record bones, don't remember nicknames and ochre whispers fade. They argue too about the animal humans painted in caves. Are the antlered figures and fanged faces shamans in trance, or storytellers in costume, or later graffiti that wandered into holiness by accident? The antlered sorcerer of Les Trois Frères will spark lectures and friendly feuds. So will the half-beast figurine carved of ivory, the Leuvenmensch lion person, standing 30-some centimeters tall and older than many rivers' memories. Were such blends about power, prayer, or play? You don't know. You do know that wearing a hood with ears changes the way your feet place themselves, and that is practical magic. The ritual tonight isn't a sermon. It's rehearsal for luck. You pace with the hood and practice wolf-walking knees' soft weight, the way Snow likes gaze out and past, not at and into. The child copies, overdoes. It turns into a bobbing boat. You nudge her ankle with your toe. She steadies suddenly quiet in her bones. You chalk 3 paw prints on the spear thrower with burnt stick, not because spirits read chalk, but because you do. Symbols make you hold the tool like it deserves holding. You scrape a shallow notch on the haft for each winter you've shared with the pack. The wood becomes a timeline you can feel in the dark. Someone hums, and the hum becomes a circle. You add the bird bone whistle's softest note not as command but as thread. The wolves don't flinch. The note has been invitations and breaks. Now it is just a thin silver string that stitches the people together. You pass the whistle to the child, and she learns, oh, how quietly a sound can lead. Joke 2. You whisper to the ravens that you're charging for tickets tonight. They pay in gossip and discarded snail shells, which you accept because barter is a lifestyle. You lay out tokens by the fire for a first hunt vow, a strip of frozen fat for stamina, a twist of sinew for ties that hold a pebble rubbed smooth by river, for eyes to see easy paths, and a single gray hair from the bold sentinel's ruff for the habit of looking outward first. The child touches each and repeats the little phrases you stitched there. You add a final pinch of ash for patience, always the ash, and dust her palms so the lesson sits where she'll see it when she lifts her hands. Ceremony is just muscle memory with better lighting. Mainstream anchor number 2, quiet as the steam from your pot. Therianthropic figures, human-animal blends, do appear in prehistoric art from many lands, suggesting that crossing categories wasn't a weird hobby. It was a language. Later, people will call that shamanic, sometimes loosely, sometimes precisely. You avoid the big word and keep the small practice becoming with to understand better. When you pull the hood forward and let the birch bark ears frame the edge of your sight, you're not pretending to be a wolf. You are practicing the act of sharing a job. You finish the mask with a rim of wolfgrass, tough bunches from the slope where the pack beds in summer, and with 3 small shell beads that click like bone rings when you tilt your head. The sound becomes a habit cue. Tilt, click, scan the dark. You don't want to become a theater piece. You want to become reliable. The pups squint at the clicking and then copy the head tilt. They look very wise and very silly. That's fine wisdom and silliness, are cousins who share snacks. A fringe story walks in on the smoke somewhere to the east. A camp paints a guardian on a standing stone, a canid so stretched by memory it looks like winter with teeth. They leave offerings at its base, a paw-sized cup of grease, a loop of sinew, a scrap of kid hide. Do they worship wolves? You'd say no. They practice gratitude for alarms and for a perimeter that stands when your eyes shut. Worship is too big. Thank you is the correct shape. You tell an origin tale because origin tales lubricate rules. Once you say the first person asked the wind to watch the camp. The wind said yes, and then went everywhere at once and forgot to tell us anything. The second person asked the ravens, and they told us everything at once and we couldn't sleep. The third person asked the wolves and they said, we will tell you only what tries to enter. The child nods solemnly. The wolves blink. The ravens pretend they were misquoted. Joke 3 lands like a feather. When the storytelling simmer cools, you set the mask aside, not hung high like a trophy, but folded neat by the ash ring, because power that brags becomes clumsy. You loop the tooth thong around your wrist. The tiny taps will remind you to look left when you want to look right. You tie a strip of gray fur at the spear's balance point. so a glance can find center in a hurry. You're covering your bets with craft with luck, with a little theater. Historians still argue whether buried canids with humans in the Natufian South and European river valleys mark companion symbols or both, whether those graves mean dog or wolf or something between, with a job and a place at the fire. They'll weigh toothware and stature, calculate ages, and write handsome papers. Your contribution is smaller and messier. A whispered name that isn't wolf crossing your lips at the ash line, a hood that sharpens your gait. A child whose palms remember patience because ash lived there for a minute. The bold gray stands circles once and settles again with his chest pointed at the brush where trouble practices. You mirror the posture without thinking, chin tucked, eyes soft, but not closed. The camp breathes. The mask rests. Tomorrow you'll hunt without wearing it because the body keeps what rehearsal taught. And when you toss the first scrap to the dish, beyond the ash, you'll call the sentinel look through under your breath because names, careful, respectful names, are also tools. They carve you into the person who uses them. You bank the coals into their long, low smile and let the pine needle steam drift blessings over everyone who isn't sure they deserve them. The bone rings do not tattle. The ravens drowse in their sarcasm. The wolves draw commas where the brush opens a period on the trail. And you, with a bit of birch bark ear still tickling your hairline, fall into a sleep stitched with small vows to look outward first, to move like fewer commas to keep the rules gentle enough to last. It starts with a sound you now recognize the way you recognize a friend's cough, scritch, scritch. A pup leans into a hind paw like it's a rake. The bold gray gives his shoulder a whole body shake that drizzles light snow. You scratch your own wrist in sympathy and decide today's lesson is not heroic. It's itchy. Parasites moved in without paying rent, and HR, meaning you needs policies. You pick the place just outside the ash ring warm line on one side, wind on the other, and call it the grooming station. Tools a scalloped rib for combing a flat scraper, a bowl of warm water made the old way with boiling stones, and a paste that smells like a forest. Having strong opinions, fat mixed with a pinch of charcoal and crushed spruce needles. You work the paste into the wolf's ruffs, then your own cuffs, and the camp air tilts from smoke number 10 to spa day in a pine bough. Fleas disapprove, which is the point. When one tries acrobatics across your comb, you flick it into the coals, tiny rude fireworks. Joke 1, you announce, hazard pay for fleas who survive. None apply. A sturdy anchor fact, to keep near your pulsing temples, parasites are as old as campfires. People far in your future will find worm eggs in ancient coprolites, old camp latrines turned to stone-proof, that gut hitchhikers shared our dinners and our winters. They'll also find in Neanderthal dental plaque traces of bitter plants like yarrow and chamomile, a hint that mouths learned medicine early. You don't know the names, you know the taste. You chew a sprig of what your grandmother calls fever leaf, then spit the juice on a bite and mutter that it's like drinking the moon's broom closet. Bitter is often the price of better. Boundaries stretch from bowls to bodies. You keep the feeding law scraps only beyond the ash ring and add 2 clauses. Clause 1, no raw offal for pups, no matter how many novels their tails write. You poach liver to a firm kindness and boil intestines until the steam smells like patience. Clause 2, no licking bowls. Not you, not wolves. It's adorable and also a parasite newsletter. You rinse with hot water and a handful of ash, the same leaning grit you used to clean tools, until everything squeaks faintly like a mouse signing off. Quirky lore multiplies faster than fleas. A cousin swears by hanging bundles of wormwood and wild mint at the doorway, so bad dreams and worse bugs leave politely. Another insists that sprinkling a finger of ash along a sleeping mat writes a line insects don't like to cross. The ravens chaff at your herb bundles, then sit above them anyway. You don't care whether science or sass powers the charms. You care that the pups sleep without scratching their eyebrows off. Bites, when they happen, are not debates. their procedures. You practice the trade game every afternoon so no one guards food. Like it's a crown offer, a strip. Say your soft whistle, show the extra in your other hand. Swap cleanly. Praise with breath and a chin rub. The rule sinks in, give, get, relax. On the day a juvenile forgets and closes teeth too tight on your sleeve, you freeze stone, boring, the same as when pups first learn gentle. When he lets go, you give a 3-breath timeout. No eye contact, no words, no tosses, then reset. The social chill does the teaching. Joke 2. You tell the camp HR department you filed the incident under teeth, acting without consulting brain. Some injuries ignore policy. A careless paw opens your forearm in a crescent. Nothing dramatic, but red enough to be a sermon. You rinse with warm water and ash, then pack the scrape with crushed yarrow and a flap of honeyed moss. Fun fact you learned from a boggy aunt: sphagnum drinks like a saint and fights rot like a tiny soldier. Later wars in other centuries will use it by the sack. You wrap with softened bark and tie a tidy bow that impresses no one but you. The wound hums less. You hold your arm up like a small flag and declare working, because if you don't joke, you'll just stare at it. Historians still argue whether early camps like yours practiced true quarantine. Did people isolate sick animals and themselves with intentional spacing? Or did wind smoke and the size of winter shelters incidentally do the job? They also argue where rabies sits on this timeline of teeth and trust. The story you inherit is older than debate. Biting sickness is a phrase your grandmother uses with the kind of hush that makes everyone check the perimeter. So you write a rule. Animals that bite without cause don't sleep inside the outer ring for 3 nights. Pups that nip play get longer naps and more chores. People who tease firewood duty. You don't need a word for quarantine to practice it. You draw a second thinner ash line beyond the first and call it the sneeze ring, mostly to make children laugh. It marks the place a wolf can sleep close to warmth without breathing into anyone's dreams. It also marks where a coughing cousin sits with a blanket and a bowl of pine needle broth, listening to stories from the safe side of humor. Distance is medicine your camp can afford. Ticks become your slowest enemies and your most satisfying victories. You pinch close to the skin with the ribcomb's notch twist, whisper an apology into fur, and drop the offender into a cup of oil. You smear a smidge of pine pitch over the bite tree glue as bandage and scratch the wolf's chest, because dignity is a co-medicine. You check your own hairline with the child's help and repay the favor with a braid that keeps your neck from becoming a highway. The ravens patrol for dropped ticks with the glee of critics finding plot holes. Mainstream practicality folds into the routine. You move the latrine trench downstream and downwind. You seed it with ash each evening and mark it with a stack of 3 stones, so even a sleepwalker can read the icon. You boil snow for drinking on days when the river groans ominously. You keep a touchwood ember in a tinier pouch, so hot water is a whistle away. You teach the child to wash hands in meltwater mixed with ash before she helps stir the pot. She rolls her eyes and does it anyway. That eye roll is hereditary. Misfires teach as much as vermin. One afternoon, lulled by sun on snow, you scratch a pup's scruff near the ash ring, and he flops into you, bliss-drunk paws scattering coals. Nothing catches but your ribs perform a lively drum solo. You answer with a new ritual grooming, only at the station, never at the hearth. You mark the spot with a loop of braided grass. The wolves learn in 2 days what a barber sign means. The ravens learn faster and perch there pretending to offer consultations. Joke 3, you tip them in compliments. They demand awful. You keep aggression tiny by making calm huge. Slicker games with rules, more trades, more sit and wait before bowls land. A soft muzzle, 2 turns of sinew that lie easy unless teeth argue sits coiled near the grooming kit. You've used it twice, briefly kindly. The bold gray watched both times with the face of a manager who agrees with a policy he didn't write. Historians still argue whether dog domestication narrowed skulls and softened tempers because people picked for friendliness, or because camp life itself rewarded the animals who wasted less energy on drama. Standing in your grooming station, fingers smelling of spruce and charcoal, you file that argument under yes. You favor the pup who blinks when asked and sits when the ash ring suggests. You favor the cousin who feeds after the elder eats. You favor habits that make tomorrow boring. By twilight, the scratching quiets, the paste dries into a faint protective sheen, and the grooming station smells like a tiny forest shrine. You bank the coals into their long red smile and feel your arm's bandage settle into skin. The bold gray chooses the sneeze ring without prompting. The pups discover that sleeping without itching is the best invention since soup. The bone rings hang ready to gossip if the dark writes anything worth hearing. Inside this tidy web of ash lines soft muzzles, hot stones, and jokes. You repeat on purpose, friendship stays friend-shaped and doesn't slip its leash. You tuck your hands under your cheek and listen to the camp breathe. Parasites will return. So will winter and hunger and the hyena with a sense of humor. But tonight, the laws you drew in chalk and patience hold. Teeth have jobs. Bowls are clean. The fire is a quiet editor, and the pact you're writing together, species to species, scratch to scratch, keeps its margins neat enough that everyone sleeps with fewer commas and more periods. You tie your world into bundles, ribs smoked to mahogany fat, cooled to white candles, sinew coiled. Like polite snakes, a pouch of touchwood embers wrapped in bark, so your fire remembers you when you forget yourself. The bold gray lowers into his harness without theater. Pups no longer quite pups jig-jog beside the travois and pretend the ice is a drum they're not absolutely dying to tap. You point your chin at the river and say, the camp's shortest prayer hold. The river hums the low note that means yes. The first crossing is a library of noises. Ice squeaks, harness thunks, rawhide sings like a careful violin. You plant your spear butt and test ahead, 2 breaths at a time, a moving ritual you could do asleep. The gray reads the ice with his wrists, that feline softness wolves wear when they're sober. When he pauses and the bone rings in your pouch clink, you angle left without speaking. Joke one muttered because comedy travels best in a whisper. Thank you, quality assurance. The ravens audit from a pine and pretend not to be impressed. On the far bank, the land changes fonts. Tundra gives way to open steppe, then steppe frays into larch and birch that draw ink lines across the snow. Your habits change their clothes to match. Where wind used to be, your only editor now trees add punctuation. You didn't ask for creaks, snaps, soft thuds of snowcaps abandoning branches. You set bone rings in your hair this time, so a shake of your head can wake 2 wolves with a private chime if the brush invents trouble. The ash ring travels with you sketched each dusk around a new hearth. The rule follows it like a shadow that knows the way. A sturdy anchor to tuck into your traveling belt. People like you are already a wide rumor across the north. Bones, ash, and chipped stone trail. Your footsteps from Atlantic to Pacific, from river mouths to mountain saddles, where the sea kisses the far northeast and the world once froze into a land bridge. Later folk will call it Beringia and argue dates over stew. Dog shaggier cousins of your gray leave their own signatures in those far futures bones, buried with care teeth, worn in hauling ways, skulls a little shorter than their wolf grandparents. Whether they cross that old bridge with the first feet or with the next wave, they don't stay strangers for long. Scholars still argue whether people entered the big new lands by an inland ice-free corridor, by skirting kelp-rich coasts in quiet boats, or by both one song sung in 2 keys. They also argue whether dogs padded beside you from the first steps, or trotted in later adopted from new neighbors. The debates will heat tents long after your tent is wind. Your version is simpler. If a trail is long and a child is tired, a harness becomes hope. You change your menu to suit the map. On the steppe, reindeer. Again drives bent by snow berms, and your hand signs that have learned to speak between trees. In timber, boar and stag, with ambushes stitched into brush, and wolves flanking. Where echoes don't turn, orders into gossip. In spring, rivers glint with salmon so thick, You could step on them if you were a fool. You compromise by scooping with wicker throats while the gray plants himself downstream to glare at bears with professional skepticism. In sea-licked places, you learn seals calendar their air holes a necklace in the ice. You install patience by a hole whistle the softest hold, and when the seal rises, the spear writes a quick, merciful sentence. You feed everyone the period. Quirky traveling lore accumulates like snow in your hood. A cousin swears that smearing a fingertip of rendered fish oil on the runners each dawn makes the day go easier because the sled thinks it's a seal. Someone else insists a tuft of the bold gray's shed fur tied into a child's bootlace keeps ankles from picking fights with roots. You won't defend either in a debate, but you will keep doing both, as long as your ankles remain unpunched. A neighbor band shows you fish skin boots, scaled translucent, dried to a flexible armor that laughs at slush and sass. You trade a coil of sinew and a bone flute for the pattern. Joke 2, you announce your new boutique line River Couture and the Ravens demand royalties. Rivers become roads in winter and arguments in thaw. You map the fords in your bones. You memorize the sound that means under ice water is chewing the edges of your confidence. When you must ferry rather than cross, you lash willow frames into a raft and seal the seams with pitch that smells like the inside of a tree having a thoughtful day. The wolves ride last and lightest. The gray pretends rafts are beneath him until the moment his paws leave shore when he becomes an expert in not blinking. You glide. You do not joke until both banks have had their say. Along the way, you replant your rules like traveling herbs. Ash ring every camp. Bone rings by any trail that feels like it has opinions. Soft whistle in your teeth. Grooming station a few paces downwind fleas migrate too. They should at least get their steps in. Marrow banked in snow. Grease cached in pits, marked by 3 stones. So even tomorrow you can read yesterday's handwriting. The wolves relearn the perimeter at each new address, which looks like magic and is only consistency. Mainstream fact to polish like a bead in river valleys far inland. People will one day lay their dead to rest with dogs at their sides. Dogs wearing collars of elk tooth or shells gathered from distances that say someone walked or traded like it mattered. Burials near big Siberian lakes. Graves under mild European hills, even a loved animal tucked into a child's resting place. Proof that the Pact travels not as a convenience, but as a relationship with luggage. You don't see those graves. You only see the way your child sleeps with her hand in the gray's ruff, and how your grandmother looks at that hand like it's a story that made it home. Misfires travel too. On a forest drive, your fan left-hand sign meets a curtain of ferns and becomes do anything you like. 2 wolves do, in fact, anything they like. The boar turns you. Step the ash of your practice saves your knee, and your apology to the gray is immediate and with snacks. You adapt in thick brush. You switch to a wrist flick paired with a bone rattle you once retired. In timber, the rattle's soft burr survives the leaves' appetite for sound. The wolves don't mind new dialects as long as you pay on time and don't change the jokes. Mosquito season arrives like someone spilled pepper into the air. Your smoke shifts, blends damp herbs, punky wood to thicken the veil. You rub a paste of ash and fat into exposed skin and pretend the sheen is glamorous. The wolves sneeze offended then, walk into the smoke anyway, because the alternative is winged theft. Fringe tidbit a wanderer, the wemgemuers that painting a ring of soot around your wrists confuses biting flies because they think you have too many hands. You don't buy the theory, but you enjoy the bracelets. Scholars still argue whether dogs' first jobs on long moves were hauling guarding or warming sled traces, warning barks, or living hot water bottles under felted cloaks. Standing in a wind that moved 3 camps out of you, you know the answer is yes. On a night when the sky rattles with aurora and the cold creeps into your teeth, the gray's back pressed to your spine is both engineering and faith. You collect place names that are only for you. Drift edge birch spine, the 3 stones that gossip. You learn which valleys hoard echo and which hills return whistles clean. You learn that a certain bend of river always tries to trick you into thinking ice is thicker than it is, and you counter-trick by sending the gray ahead while keeping the line slack enough that trust can reverse without embarrassment. Joke 3 soft. Because dignity is a delicate bread. Leading is mostly knowing when to pretend you planned the retreat. A practical rhythm settles into the march. Morning thaw the whisker frost from mustaches yours, the wolves, the ravens, if they insist on fashion grease, the runners check the paws, test the ice. Midday short hunts that lean on hand signs, not speed because snow eats speed. Evening ashring grease share grooming bone rings set to tattletale stories. The hood with birch bark ears stays folded most days. You don't need costume to remember posture now. The child now whistles the hold note better than you do. The gray listens to her like she invented patience. On certain ridges, the world drops its winter mask and shows you what it's been arranging lines of reindeer stitched across a white page. Dark forests promising mushrooms and trouble. A ribbon of sea that says, fish like a vow. The path you're on is not a road someone else laid. It's a braid your feet and paws and runners make together strand by strand. Behind you, the snow writes your names in its quiet script, and then, with weather's famous editing, erases them. What stays isn't tracks. It's the habits that drew them. You bank the traveling fire at the end of another long day and sketch the ash ring with a hand that learned this line in 10 previous camps. The gray angles outward. The not quite pups choose the sneeze ring because perfect is now a reflex. The ravens mutter invitations to tomorrow. You tuck your chin, breathe smoke and pine and distance, and feel the earth's slow rivers moving under your ribs. Across rivers and into new continents, the Pact keeps pace, ears pricked, hands steady, jokes polite enough to pass border checks. You fall asleep between breath and paw, and the road keeps going in your dreams, gentle as a sled on good ice. The snow tells you the news long before the air agrees to say it out loud. Cat tracks like stitched coins cross the drift above the ravine where yesterday became soup. Hyena prints scalloped the edges like someone with opinions kept pacing. The bold gray lifts his head and writes you a one-word memo with his eyes company. You lower your hand the stop sign that smells like ash and promises, and the camp's heartbeat evens out the way a drum steadies when a good hand finds it. This won't be a story about heroics. It'll be a ledger risk in one column, loyalties in the other, and a subtotal you can live with. You start by budgeting noise. The bone rings you love hang where the wind can kiss them without turning truth into theater. Fire is banked into a low, unimpressive accountant. You move the youngest to the inside of the ash halo. You set the grease bowl just beyond the pail in the spot you've used since payroll, after probation became a running joke. Joke 1 whisper weight, because dignity has thin skin. Quarterly disbursements begin after we are not eaten. The ravens approve the copy. They always do. The first rival to test your columns is a hyena shoulders, rolling like a laugh that forgot its punchline. It has patience, which is to say, it isn't hungry enough to be foolish yet. 2 more ghost the brush line, and collectively remember they are a guild. The gray doesn't growl. He angles outward, chest square to the not quite visible third body. You mirror him without thinking. Your math for hyenas is simple. We do not chase. We do not run. We become expensive. You lift a burning brand high enough to make the air blink, and then put it down low where paws think twice. Hyenas love bargains. You remove all coupons. A mainstream anchor to keep by the coals, the late Pleistocene wasn't just your show. Cave hyenas. Crocuta, Spelaea, cave lions, Panthera spelaea, and cave bears. Ursus, Spelaeus, ran the same routes, haunted the same shelter mouths, and left bone piles and tooth-scraped grooves that look like signatures to patient archaeologists. Hyena dens with cracked long bones whisper of marrow thieves. Cave bear hibernation chambers where claw marks and layered bedding. Some caves read like timeshare agreements bear one winter. People and others sometimes alternating within a single lifetime. Tonight's hyenas decide your new employee orientation is boring. They fade not defeated, just uninterested in paperwork. That's a win. You don't cheer, you breathe. You tip the gray's ear with your eyes and set the grease dish down anyway at distance, because the contract isn't with hyenas. It's with the wolves who stayed polite while your hands remembered how to be dull in exactly the right way. Morning brings the kind of calculus that squeezes your ribs. A lion's prints bigger than your open hand mar the crust around yesterday's cached quarter of reindeer. You find him there at noon, tawny as old straw against the blue glare, pretending the world is his idea. He does not need your permission to eat. He also doesn't wish to fight for it. The wolves stop where you usually set the ash line, sit like punctuation, and watch. You watch too, behind a half-raised palm. Your moral math is ugly, but clear meat can be replaced by walking. Wolves and people cannot be replaced at all. You back away, slide a small share from a second cache in a direction that reads convenient, and make the rest of the decision for the cat. He chooses your suggestion because cats are excellent at selecting the option they swear they invented. Joke 2 muttered, "Thank you for attending our offsite. Please take a gift bag." Historians still argue whether early dogs, whenever the moment tips from wolf to dog, ever truly fought off apex rivals for humans, or whether their main gift was early warning, more ears, more noses, more time to decide not to be foolish. They also argue how often people surrendered kills to cats and hyenas as a strategic retreat instead of a failure. Your ribs have the answer you can live with. Sometimes you pay the tax in meat, so you don't pay it in blood. Quirky tidbit to tuck into your pouch. Your grandmother keeps a bear claw tied with sinew to her belt, not as a trophy, but as a reminder to nap like a season. Every winter she recites a half prayer to Ursus, teach our bones to waste less, and smears a whisper of bear grease along the doorpost, so dreams don't wander off and come back feral. You don't know if the bears appreciate the PR. You do know that when a big dark shape sways near your camp one afternoon, sniffing with the absent-mindedness of a creature debating whether to exist somewhere else, your whole alliance performs restraint. Like it trained for this, you steady with your ember rake. The gray knot bobbing. The pups frozen into statues who think about positive life choices. The bear chooses berries that aren't there and moves on, and you make a new policy you'll pretend is a tradition. No meat stored in caves ever. Caves are for sleeping, when the sky wants to be rude, not for turning the most literal bear market into an extended metaphor. You scratch that rule on your spear haft beside the tally of winters. No pantries where things hibernate. Then comes the day when the math hurts. On a narrow shelf above a river, ice thinning water complaining in its throat, a sub-adult hyena decides to be brave. At the same moment, a not-quite pup decides to be curious. The angles are wrong. The distance is wrong. You whistle the soft hold note that has saved you from 15 avoidable headaches. And you throw a palm-sized haunch, not at the hyena, but past it, where scent will drag its greed away from your mistake. The gray moves between without flourish. Not teeth, not contact, just big-chested geometry, and for one long breath, you do a terrible inventory child elder gray pup. Who gets saved first? Your bones know child elder gray pup because children are tomorrows and elders are libraries, and the gray is the alarm that keeps both breathing. The pup learns a lesson he will pretend he knew all along. You do not tell this story like a hero later. You tell it like a clerk who filed the cost where it belongs. You add a clause to the traveling rules. Narrow shelves are for single file and quiet ankles. You also add treats to your pouch that throw straighter than panic does. HR updates the handbook. The Ravens request a hard copy. Joke 3, you tell them you're moving to a paperless system. They swear dramatically and drop a pine cone on your head. A mainstream detail to keep your courage honest. Some prehistoric sites show gnaw marks on human bones that match hyena teeth and claw scratches on cave walls. At heights your shoulders don't reach. Hyenas dragged the unwary. Bears woke wrong. Lions tested the border of your patience. You are not top of anything. You are very skilled at being middle while pretending middle was the goal all along. That humility saves calories. It also keeps wolves alive. When you choose to move camp rather than guard a carcass into the night, you're not quitting. You're buying sleep, which buys tomorrow. Historians still argue whether the alliance with canids tipped the balance. In this predator guild, did borrowed ears and disciplined bodies let your kind spread into riskier places? Or did you already have the map and simply add four-legged commas for better punctuation? They'll write models count bones and disagree amiably over fire. You'll keep the simpler math more listeners equals fewer surprises. Fewer surprises equals more marrow. There are days you stand with the wolves in a line that says no farther, and you mean it with your whole skeleton. A lean lion considers the message tests one step and sees your brand lift and the gray not blink. The lion chooses dignity. You feel your own grow 2 inches taller. There are other days you wave a gracious hand to the cat at your cache to the bear, sniffing your dream posts, and you choose dignity of a different stripe. Either way, your pact earns interest when you don't spend bodies to protect stories you can remake with time and tinder. By dusk, the camp is back inside its sensible borders. The ash ring glows with its soft law. The grease bowl sits empty and clean because you washed it like parasites keep calendars. The gray angles outward at his usual station. The not quite pups choose the sneeze ring like second nature. You test the bone rings with a fingertip. One kiss, then quiet. Somewhere beyond the brush, a hyena laughs at a joke you didn't hear. Somewhere under a hillside, a bear breathes like a tide. Your ledger balances. You lay your head on your hands and let humility do its work. The kind that sleeps lighter listens earlier and keeps tomorrow uncrowded by regrets. Seasons loop until even the wind feels familiar, and one morning, you notice the faces watching your hands have changed. Muzzles a touch shorter, brows a little friendlier, tails that rest like commas instead of exclamation points. You scratch a chin and feel the jawline of a creature that no longer belongs entirely to the dark beyond the ash ring. Somewhere between look-through holding the night and waiters sitting for soup wolves have started answering to a different job title. You don't say the new word out loud yet, but it taps at your teeth like a bead on a thong dog. You didn't plan it like a sculptor. You behaved like a cook, adding a pinch of patience here, ladling calm over there, serving seconds to the ones who blinked instead of bristled. Mothers who loaf nicely by the hearth keep their pups. Jumpy thieves don't get as many chances to try. The camp's invisible hand becomes a very real selector. Soft eyes earn bone, measured hearts get mates. Over a handful of winters, faces soften, as if carved by warmer tools. Over a handful more personalities, squint into cuddlier shapes without losing the old perimeter instincts that let you sleep. A sturdy anchor you can lay beside the hearth in later graves. Bonn Oberkassel, near the Rhine Natufian. Burials to the south, people will rest with clear, unmistakable dogs, not wolves. Shorter snouts, crowded teeth, some with inflammation that somebody nursed through because love and soup are apparently medical devices. Those animals lie with beads and ochre, like persons who had titles. The Pact has a body you can count. Earlier skulls Goyet Altai will make scholars squint early dogs or friendly wolves with interesting cheekbones. The arguments will keep fires warm for a century. For now, your fingers already know the difference. This head likes the ash ring, and that one likes the places where ash ends. Joke one lands while you're threading a new collar from softened bark and plaited sinew. You hold it up, announce promotions. Effective immediately, and the ravens who invented HR demand to see the job description. You tell them it's mostly look outward, nap inward. They accept a payment of offal in lieu of paperwork. Behavior outpaces bones. The not quite pups follow your point the way water follows a slope. Eyes flick to your fingertip, then to the thing, then back to you for the confirmation you invented last season with a slow blink. You whistle the hold note and get a sigh. A good sigh. The kind that says, we'll keep the luck where it is. At the river, a pair flank without your telling. In brush, they freeze at your palm high and become handsome statues until go becomes the smallest nod. You used to feel like a person with wolf neighbors. You now feel like a very small team with uniforms made of patience. Quirky tidbit slips into camp like a wagging rumor when a youngster sheds his first puppy coat. Your grandmother ties a pinch of the fluff to the travois with red thread, so the road remembers he belongs. Someone else braids a thin cord from brushed belly fur to stitch a child's mitten, soft as apologies, warm as bragging. You pretend not to be sentimental and absolutely are. The night changes flavor. Instead of a ring of watchful commas that merely angle outward, you get commas and a footnote. One dog inside the sneeze ring. Ring a steady heartbeat close enough to pat in your sleep without singeing knuckles. You learn that warmth you can nudge is not a luxury, it's a sedative. Children who used to flinch at the bone ring's tiny kiss now roll over, place a palm in fur, and treat the alarm like rain on the roof. The bold gray still holds the far punctuation, but the camp has acquired a pillow with opinions. Mainstream fact to tuck beside your spear thrower. Long after your ash rings turn to ghosts, people will test the chemistry of the look you share with this new face and find loops hormones that rise together when gaze meets gaze, biology's braiding for a minute and then staying braided for much longer. They'll also find in some dogs' genes that help digest starch better than wolves attuned for sedentary kitchens rather than migratory soup. That song comes later for you. For now, marrow and meat rule the playlists. Still, the shape of tomorrow is there in the way one animal chooses the hearth like a job. Historians still argue whether domestication happened once or twice, or many times with dogs recruited in different places, and later braided into one long lineage with wolves stepping in and out like cousins at a family wedding. They argue about timing. 20,000 winters 15. And point to a child and canine trackway in a painted cave that whispers of candlelight adventures. Was that a dog or a wolf who didn't mind chalk dust? The cave remains politely silent. Your answer remains impolite and practical. This one follows a point and doesn't steal soup. That's a dog for our purposes. Hunting rhythms bend around the new shape. You start using a two-phase day scouts at dawn pad. A snow-quiet loop, sniffs and ear flicks mapping fresh stories. Then the team moves at noon with intention filling in the lines, snout already underlined. Dogs push without panic, hold without heroics, and make your throws cleaner because they draw your picture smaller. You bring home fewer bruises and more boring success. A trend your bones endorse. In timber, a bell made of a hollowed tooth near a collar lets you hear when the left flank needs a nudge. On the river, traces adjust to pairs who pull like a conversation. You pick for gaits that match yours, not just for teeth that look brave in stories. Status shifts because stories do. A person with a reliable dog becomes a someone who gets asked to stand watch where the cliff path tightens. A child trusted by a patient dog becomes a nearly someone who carries messages in hand signs that now have a tail. You catch yourself saving a portion of grease automatically for the hearth sleeper before you serve your own bowl. Is that hierarchy or hospitality? The difference tastes like the same soup. Joke 2 arrives when you try to teach fetch and realize you've always taught. Bring me that disguised as, please stop chewing the drying rack. You toss a stick, say nothing, and the dog looks at you like you threw away tool material. You add a bit of sinew to the stick, call it a workpiece, and suddenly you have a very helpful apprentice who returns assets to the supply chain. The ravens wounded in their editorial souls accuse you of inventing theft. You offer them a contract, one shiny pebble per recovered stick. They countersign by stealing your whistle for an hour. Not everything smooths into poetry. A new litter includes one little tyrant with marble eyes who thinks rules are edible. You apply every policy, timeouts, trades, boring praise for boring choices, and still the tyrant campaigns for nonsense. The bold gray removes him from the bowl with the gentlest chest in history, and then lies down on the ground between you, the pup, and the food like a living ash ring. That's the day you write a new claw's temperament beats pedigree. You place the tyrant with a neighbor band that needs noise in their perimeter more than calm at their hearth. He thrives. So do you. A fringe notion makes the rounds. After a successful drive, someone swears that if you paint a small ochre dot over the dog's heart before a hunt, you'll always see him first when he returns in stormlight. You try it on a day when snow writes sideways. The dot winks through the veil like a tiny ember walking home. Is it magic? It's pigment and affection, and a trick for eyes tired of white. You adopt the habit because you like any ritual that helps you find who you love. Mainstream practicality keeps pace with myth. Collars improve wider, softer, sometimes lined with fur from shed undercoats, so chests don't chafe. Traces get a quick release knot you can pull with gloves, because sometimes the world decides to be water again while you're still on it. You carve little grips near the runner tail so steering fingers don't slip at the worst moments. You invent nothing new, really. You just keep polishing the Pact until both species shine where it matters at the edges, where weather and worry like to pry. Historians still argue whether dogs reshaped human status by becoming gifts between groups, bride wealth with paws alliances you could feed and scratch, or whether they were mostly household miracles that happened to impress visitors. Standing at your ash ring, with a dog asleep in the sneeze lane and a child tracing his ear with soot, you file the question under yes. You've traded a pup for peace once, and you've refused to trade twice because love refused. The ledger's ink is feelings. The math is still math. Night folds around the camp. The bone rings kiss once only to scold a fox with ambition. Fire keeps its low smile. Outside the pale, a perimeter of ears edits the dark. Inside, a dog dreams at your feet, paws twitching, chasing a rabbit you hope outruns him in sleep. You lay your palm on his ribs and feel the quiet drum that wasn't in your life a handful of winters ago. From wolf to dog isn't a cliff. It's a very long ramp with jokes and soup and ash and rules. You didn't domesticate anything. You hosted patience until it gave itself a nickname and lay down by the fire. Joke 3 a whisper so you don't wake the coals. Welcome to permanent staff. Benefits after probation. Retroactive. The ravens half asleep murmur that HR approves. The gray outside doesn't move, which is a kind of blessing. You close your eyes. The Pact, now wearing a softer face, keeps the night from becoming a lecture. Morning will bring another hunt, another collar to soften, another joke to repeat on purpose. For now, you sleep to the hush of a heartbeat that moved from the edge of the light to the warm side of your toes. You sit where the ash ring glows its quiet law and count the ways your world has changed, not with numbers, but with breaths. Once the edge of light was crowded by yellow eyes that measured you as risk or recipe. Now a softer face naps in the sneeze ring and edits your dreams from the inside. Once you timed your sleep by how long a stick smolders. Now you sleep in longer pieces because someone else prefers the dark and volunteers to listen to it. Once you walked as far as your back could bargain. Now, winter grows handles and a chest in a harness lends you miles you didn't know how to afford. The Pact didn't arrive with a speech. It arrived with a blink, a dish set just beyond a line, and a habit of being boring in ways that kept tomorrow from getting dramatic. You can feel the rewiring in your hands. They speak more than they throw. Now steady palms in small circles, and a fist near your hip that can turn wolves into statues and dogs into punctuation that keeps a sentence from running away. You can feel it in your voice too, quieter, less interesting to prey, kinder to the child whose ears hold sleep like a secret. Your stories lean into this new grammar. You tell fewer epics about heroes outrunning cats and more fables about how ash teaches patience, how bone rings gossip without panic, how payroll after probation is a ceremony precisely because you refuse to improvise the important parts. Joke 1 soft, so respect doesn't spill. Annual reviews remain belly rubs and soup vouchers. HR confirms. A sturdy anchor to set by the Coles dogs are the first domesticated animals in your line of tomorrow companions. Before goats, before cattle, before any plant willingly farms you back, dog burials with people will stack across continents and centuries. Some will show healed wounds and bad teeth that somebody kept feeding anyway. That arc, the leap from perimeter ally to hearthkin, writes itself into bone and bead and ochre so often that even patient scholars stop calling it an exception and start calling it a pattern. The older wolf skulls with interesting cheekbones will keep giving lectures, and the younger dog skulls with friendlier brows will nod along like they already know the punchline. The practical ledger glows at the edges of your days. The Alliance fed you better because drives became cleaner and calmer. It moved you farther because snow became road. It warned you earlier because noses and ears braided with your slow human attention into a net with smaller holes. But it also rearranged your inside furniture. You rehearse listening as a skill, not a pose. You budget gentleness as if the camp runs on it, which frankly, it does. Your children grow up bilingual in gaze and gesture, fluent in the ethics of the ash ring, capable of trading a bowl without growling, because trade has been a game since their hands were small. Quirky tidbit, the sort of thing you pretend to be embarrassed by and secretly adore you. You keep a stitched pouch of shed under fur, pale soft as apologies. And when journeys get long, or arguments with weather go sideways, you press it to your cheek for a breath. It smells like smoke number 10 pine ointment and a heartbeat that thinks you're worth guarding. You don't call that medicine, you call it reminding. The Raven's lifelong editors take credit for your progress, of course. They insist your hand signs improved after their relentless notes, and they submit invoices payable in awful. Joke 2, you stamp the air with a palm and declare approved. Payable upon satisfactory caw. They sign with sarcasm and a feather. Historians still argue whether you domesticated dogs or dogs domesticated you, whether patience and selection moved mostly in your hands or mostly in theirs, whether the oxytocin loop that later people will measure started at your blink or their tail. They'll also keep quarreling about where and when one cradle or several west or east earlier than some bones will admit, or later than some genes will confess. The debates do good work keeping tents warm in winter. Your answer is domestic as a cooling ladle we became each other's habit. You feel the legacy most in the parts of life that don't get songs. Fewer frantic nights, more mornings with spoons. The bones you stash for lean months last longer because the perimeter keeps honest watch. The rules you keep around bowls and ash lines spill over into everything else you mend before you must. You rest without apologizing. You share because it's the shortest road to peace. A camp that could have been 20 individuals becomes one creature with many eyes. A species that could have hoarded fear turns it into a tool and lends it out. The Pact invades art in friendly ways. The child draws paws next to people on the hide. You stretch for drumheads. She paints a small ochre dot over her friend's heart before a storm hunt, so he's easy to find in snow. Your mask with the birch bark ears gathers smoke sheen and stories. When you set it on a newcomer's head and teach the wolf walk, you're not pretending to be an animal. You're practicing how to be a neighbor. The line between prayer and protocol blurs into a habit that keeps soup hot and paws unburned. A mainstream echo ripples from futures you won't see. Dogs will diversify into jobs that look like fables, scenting trails that eyes can't see, hauling for joy and labor, both guarding flocks that someday bleat on green hills. You haven't imagined warming tents in deserts you don't know the names of yet. They'll also become mirrors. People will practice kindness on them deliberately, then smuggle that skill into how they treat one another. That is not sentimental. It's logistics for a species that sometimes needs rehearsal to be decent. You keep the ledger honest by admitting the costs. Parasites had to be told to find lodging elsewhere. Bites had to become procedures, not dramas. You made a rule that caves aren't pantries because bears write terrible eviction notices. You learned to surrender meat to cats, so you didn't surrender tomorrow to pride. The alliance didn't make you brave. It made you organized. That trick, humble as it sounds, outlives heroics. When you stand now and toss the evening dish to the spot where the ash line breathes the gray older scar at the ear eyes that have read more horizon than you know doesn't lunge, he looks with you outward first. The hearth dog sighs at your feet without opening his eyes. The bone rings do not kiss, because the night approves of your choices. Joke 3 barely a breath. Congratulations, everyone. Permanent staff full benefits retroactive. The child's sigh laughs in her sleep because some jokes become lullabies. You look back without turning your head, because turning your head is for weather and cats. What you see in the corner of your eye is not just a line of tracks braided with paw prints. It's a different shape carved into human time, a curve that feeds better sleeps kinder and tells stories that make room for other beating hearts. That's the legacy a perimeter that learned to include. So now, as the coals slip from orange to cherry, and then to a hush of red, let everything in you lengthen. The rules are written for the night, and the night agrees to follow them. The ash ring holds its faint pale halo. The bone rings hang still, undecided to tattle because nothing troublesome is practicing out there. You let your breathing copy the steady rhythm of the animal at your feet, a slow in a slower out, like drawing a line in snow and smoothing it with your palm. The tense skin murmurs when the breeze remembers you, and that sound is soft enough to keep. Far off, the river turns over in its sleep and pulls the blanket back up. Close by, a paw twitches once, a dream chasing something gentle, and then settles. You can feel your shoulders remembering that they don't have to be armor now. You can let your hands lie open, palms warmed by stray heat fingers, uncurled tools at rest, because there is nothing useful to hold except quiet. If you want, think of one small thing that went right today, the clean arc of a throw. The way a whistle thread stitched a line back together, the way a joke landed and made the ravens pretend they weren't pleased. Let that small thing glow like the last ember in the tray, not bright enough to keep you awake, just bright enough to make darkness feel companioned. Outside, ears aim outward on your behalf. Inside, eyelids learn to be pillows. The camp exhales. The stories you started will be waiting tomorrow, exactly where you left them, tied with sinew and patience. For now, there's no need to guard or decide or measure. This is the hour for being a person with a warm edge to their world and a heart that keeps excellent time. Let it count for you. Let it count you home.